I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really nice to have a bunch of people in the room in addition to us, so that's super cool. This is a regular meeting of the Silverton Board of Trustees. It's July 10th, 2023. The time is 7:02 p.m. and I call this meeting to order. Roll call, please. Trustee Edwards.
Here.
Trustee Cranker.
Here.
Trustee Harper. Here. Trustee Bierma is not with us tonight. Trustee George.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Bonnie.
Here.
Mayor Furman. Here. We have 6 out of 7 trustees in attendance tonight. Thank you very much. Do we have any staff or board revisions to this evening's agenda?
We have no staff revisions.
Anything from the board? Great. We'll now open up the meeting for public comment. We'll start with in-person comment followed by Zoom comments. If you're on Zoom, please go ahead and click the raise hand button so we can have you in the queue. For all comments, please begin by stating your name and then we'll keep a 3-minute timer. So whoever would like to start, I assume that we have multiple in-person public comments this evening. Please.
Good evening, everyone. Mike Ariak here, 50-year resident of Silverton, Colorado. I'd like to just say a couple of very brief comments on the on your big topic of the evening here. I believe that I've worked really hard for properties that I own, not a lot, but I intend to keep an eye on them and keep them in good shape as best I can. I know you're going to have a discussion about that later on this evening about everything that goes on with the water situation. I would like to say that you must remember that 3 main words that I always go by, and that is private property rights. And I believe those of us, and there's plenty of us who are property owners, who've worked very hard and very long to have their property. They have paid their taxes like I have for decades. And there's some changes we would probably agree with and others we won't. But the important part for me is to remember, again, I hope you say this in your nightmares tonight, private property rights. So that's the discussion that I hope you'll be having. Not only, and I'm not against anything environmental, not at all, but I think that I've worked hard for their property, would not like to see any type of changes that they don't necessarily approve of. And certainly someone else, no matter who it is, no matter what group it is, should be very, very cautious about making a designation change to people's private property. And if the private property remains that way, we have a right to keep it that way if that's what we want. Or we'll change it when the time comes if it needs changing. But it is up to the private property owner to make that decision. So I see where it says something about this is, I don't know, are you calling it an emergency ordinance? I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that's not a good narrative to bring to the discussion. People might think it's an emergency. I happen to think it's not an emergency. It's important, yes. Emergency, no. So just remember that tonight when you go to bed. Private property. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to approach the podium?
I think so. Anthony Culpepper, former resident of Silverton, now resident of Durango, but employee at Mountain States Institute, and someone who's spent over 11 years now working to restore and remediate a lot of the wetland sites that have been degraded across San Juan County. So speaking tonight from a point of science and best available information, I highly encourage this board as trustees of this community to really think through what kinds of tones you're setting forth as far as development for this community in the future and how impacts to critical ecosystems like our wetland systems can, both impact the quality of life we have in this community and the ecosystem services that are provided by our wetlands. It's my understanding that a very small percentage of developable land in San Juan County would be considered as a wetland. But that small percentage can have major impact if disturbed. We have legacies in this community of those impacts lasting, well over 100 years now, and we're working very hard to remediate those impacts now. So consider that as you're, thinking about your votes tonight, and considering this ordinance. As someone who loves this community and wants to see, sustainable development here long-term, and see that balance of retaining the ecological qualities of our community and the mountains around us, really think hard about how you're voting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more in-person public comment?
I have a question. My name is Ian Tanner. That this talk about wetlands, there will be no more public comment before that happens, correct?
I mean, we didn't have a separate public comment of that.
So if somebody wants to speak about wetlands, now would be the time.
Would be the best time.
Okay, cool.
And I didn't start your time.
Okay, ready?
Yeah.
Go. To speak about the nightmares that were just talked about, that was interesting. From what I understand, jurisdictional, non-jurisdictional, while property taxes were being paid, if they were jurisdictional wetlands, they were protected. So remember that too. And I hope no one has nightmares tonight. As far as how this whole thing is gone, with all of us, I think, starting from kind of like an ignorant ground zero with understanding the laws and that we didn't have laws put in place, there's a lot of backbiting and I think a lot of negativity sometimes being spread around and pushed around and forced around and leaned into. And I wrote something down about it, but I don't think what I wrote down is completely appropriate. So my point is that if intimidation tactics are necessary for a point to be made, that point is weak and lacking. We do not need to force our ways. There are facts and science that has been spoken to time and time and time and time again, and it has been blatantly ignored. And then, or misunderstood. I could be completely wrong. But if we can pump the brakes, take a breath and realize that private property rights are things that humans came up with and wetlands are a thing that were here long before us, one of them may matter more. And I don't think intimidation is necessary. I think it can, we're not all going to agree 100% on everything, but there's a middle ground here that we can protect the wetlands and everyone can be happy. It's doable. And for that not to be an option, I think is crazy. And I think everybody believes that is an option, but some people don't. But we don't need to put feet on necks and intimidate each other. That's not what needs to happen here. And I think we can get through this in an appropriate, level-headed, peaceful manner. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Evan. I live in Silverton.
So I read through the ordinance, so I appreciate all the time and work that went into that. I obviously didn't understand everything because I don't understand it all. But I appreciate that we're at this point and not still just at the please do something, please do something, please do something. So I appreciate that. And then I had to write this down because otherwise I'll get too flustered. I was reflecting and thinking about the last meeting, and it stuck how many times the word power was tossed around, which some of you were aware of and acknowledged. I think the appropriate word is responsibility. You all have the responsibility to uphold the values you all say you share about this community and our natural resources. You not only have this responsibility, you also have the tools to do so. We can't take for granted the beauty and abundance of our natural resources and natural spaces. They are not endless, and failing to protect our natural resources will be doing a further detriment to this society and our community. I truly don't think it is a big ask of our local government and our community to ensure decent stewardship to this land and its resources. That is all.
My name is Eric Erdman, and I live with my wife, have for 28 years at 1039 Reese Street. And I also have a property at 1221 Mineral, which is a neighbor to the very first speaker tonight. I didn't really prepare any remarks. I would just like to go on record that I'm against most of these wetland development ideas. In the same way that I would oppose, I don't know, shooting a bear, cutting down a tree needlessly, a lot of these kind of things. I don't think it's something that we can duplicate ourselves. And I don't see the benefit of it all. These days, we spend about 6 months of the year in Tucson, which is uninhabitable now by my standards, unless you're indoors. We originally came from Wisconsin, which is kind of uninhabitable now by my standards. We're kind of in a little island here. I don't have to tell anybody these things, and I'm very cautious about fooling around with it for, I don't know, financial gain. And I appreciate everything you guys all do. I know you're not probably compensated in any very luxurious way, but I know you put in a lot of time and effort. So thank you very much. I'm going to bug out.
Thank you.
Turn up your owl.
Sorry,
Turn up your owl.
the volume.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have live speakers when people are speaking in the building. Please, public comment and trustees, speak up for those who need a little extra assistance.
Any other public comment?
Hello, I'm Nate Smith. I pretty much know all of you. Thank you very much for what you do. As somebody else who has spent years volunteering in this town that my family immigrated to over Red Mountain Pass, I appreciate what you all do. And although I'm only a part-time resident right now, this is the town that I care the most about for those reasons that I just listed. And I just wanted to speak up for our wetlands like so many people have. I know that I'm not going to change any of your minds on the spot here. I'm sure you've put lots of thought into this already. So I just wanted to share some of mine as somebody who cares about our world and this town. The wetlands, as you may already know, are one of the most protected lands in the country for a reason. 80% of Colorado's species depend on wetlands at some point, if not for the entirety of their lives. They make our water cleaner. The point made earlier about private property. I'm not allowed to set my lawn on fire because I want to with my private property and let that fire spill over into other people's properties. And I think that ordinances aren't necessarily counterintuitive to private property rights or development. There's lots of potential places to develop in the town that are not affecting the wetlands. I think that to look at considered proposals for developing wetlands is the bare minimum, in my opinion, that they should just be protected outright. But that is for y'all to decide. Just wanted to voice my opinion. Thank you very much for everything.
Thank you.
I'm Jackie Kerwin. I'm a Silverton resident. I spoke, I thought, quite a bit this winter. I'm hoping, I lost all hope. And I'm hoping that now maybe we are going to talk to each other and we are going to perhaps listen to each other. I sat at meetings with all of you for 4 hours with no heat practically, or a broken window or whatever it was. And with people, you know, older people that I was just sickened by what we were put through. One thing that, and I know this is just me with old school, but it's something from coming from someone, I'm married to someone who has been the mayor twice and was on the town board once. And one thing that he said was, when you have a group of people that are from the community, that are here, that have a problem, you don't put them at the very end of a 4-hour meeting. You listen to the voice of the people from your town and listen to them first and show some respect. And it was very disappointing. I will not give up on the wetlands. I'm very sad that there's been some talk of people, you know, just speaking out against, well, the people who were here in the winter didn't really care. They just like to sit in here and be cold. But no, we all care. And sometimes it's hard to watch someplace that you love so much being abused by so many people. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other in-person public comment?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Cole Davenport. Thank you guys doing what you all do and helping us get our community together. I would like to you guys consider the entire wetland thing. The Army Corps of Engineer had lifted the entire wetlands out that way, not considered a wetland. Yes, they was designated one time and everything was reconsidered. There is a lot of stuff up in that area that's been disturbed before in the past. Used to be a brick yard out there. If y'all don't remember, some of the historians will tell you. However, it's pretty, not, I'm going to say disgusting or gross or anything, but it just should be considered that this board should let the people have their rights. We bought our little place out here to preserve it too. Yes, we want to develop our own places, as y'all want to do the same thing. If y'all want to have development here, our government federally has lifted that. We can develop. We are an economical development community area designated by the federal government to develop. By devaluing our lands and it's taking away from our citizens our rights to develop, excuse me. Sorry, I'm emotional with that too as well. But as a veteran, we have rights as well as y'all do, as we have the right to develop. Taking this away from us makes us feel like we are not wanted in this community. It hurts every one of us emotionally and physically with stress. Stress will destroy a person. Those of you who have a PTSD would know that. Any PTSD comes in many forms. But when I have rights that I want to do something nice, and then this is just coming up out of an emergency. What's an emergency to me when I want to come up here to get a building permit and I have to wait months and weeks? Everybody has to wait months and weeks to get an answer. This is not an emergency. There's a lot of emergencies in this town that need to be addressed. This is almost just idiocracy at its best, finest in democracy. If you guys want to change something, put a petition to it and put it a vote to the people. And let the people decide as their own instead of a hierarchy of this sort. How am I doing on time? Excuse me.
10 seconds.
Thank you. So the people who want to help develop this want us to succeed. So please let us succeed. Thank you all.
Thank you. Any more in-person public comment?
Not good at this. JP Stanley. I think that nothing should be in an emergency when it comes to this kind of thing. Kind of new to hearing about all this and didn't really have a lot of time to think about it, but anytime you put an emergency in there, someone better be dying or you know, something like that. But I think just because a government entity backs out doesn't mean that you get free reign to do what you want. I feel like there needs to be scientific data, new scientific data. We don't need to be relying on what they called it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. It needs to be something, if we're going to make a change to something, it needs to be thought about. It needs to be the people that know what they're talking about need to be put in place to diagnose the situation and find out what we're actually sitting on. You know, there's mention of habitat and the moose and stuff, the stuff that we get to take pictures of and see every time they come through. They're always on the top side there. There's a whole hillside to build on. So what about keeping a corridor? I don't know, you know, I just think that the bottom line is, I don't think that people in a room can make a decision on the nature that we destroy or try to protect without data. And I think that's what we're missing here is the data, you know, because everybody's got their opinions. People that own that land, they want to make money on it, or they want to build on it, or they want to have a home on it. But then there's people that don't want that because they want to be able to see the moose. You got to think about everybody's entity. I mean, there's money to be made up there. But we can't just go off of money for sure. But I mean, we have to respect the people that do own these properties. And that's why I think it's very important to have a scientific background to base it on and skip the emergency thing. I don't even know what somebody want to build a house tomorrow. Is that what it is? I don't know. I don't know enough about the emergency part of it, so I can't say, but I just think it needs to be scientific, needs to have a backing of the people, which somebody even said someone said no one cares. Anyone that lives here cares full time, guaranteed. So emergency out, let's get some data in and let's think about this as a community, which I think we're starting to get into more of a community here the past year at least. And that's all I gotta say.
All right. Thank you. Do we have any other in-person public comment?
Supposed to sign this, right?
Yeah, you should sign it. Yeah. But we also have the recording with everybody introducing themselves.
My name is Jake Kurzweil, permanent resident here in Silverton, along with my wife. I hold a PhD in hydrologic science and engineering. Got a master's that focused on wetlands and springs. Sorry, I rarely write these down. I continue to work as a hydrologist, researching and restoring wetlands in the San Juans. Today, I spent most of my day at Chattanooga Fen and Ophir Fen on restoration projects. And then I submitted a restoration project for the U.S. Forest Service in Arizona. So this is what I do for a job. My goal in presenting these in these settings is to provide peer-reviewed scientific information to ensure our community is informed when making hard choices like this one. Wetlands, including the delineated wetlands on Shrine Hill, conducted by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, are of great importance to not just our ecosystems, but our human communities as a whole. Some may wonder, but these are small. How can the degradation of these small systems impact our larger landscapes? Well, these wetlands act as stormwater buffers, absorbing water, preventing flooding on many established buildings here in Silverton. Ironically, if we develop these wetlands, those that do will face possible flooding of their own basements, as some trustees have, and cause additional negative impacts to their downstream neighbors, while eliminating the ecosystem services that the wetlands provide. That seems like a negative. These systems are small, but they make a big difference. These systems, they're getting smaller. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service estimates that Colorado alone has lost over 50% of our wetlands. And with the new Supreme Court of the United States ruling last month, we estimate that we've lost an additional 80% of protections in the Southwest. These small systems are getting smaller. And they also support high levels of biological diversity and serve as a safety net for the flora and fauna in a warming climate. These small systems make a big impact, and so do homes. For the people that live and work in Silverton, according to the town of Silverton, there's 163 acres of developable land on Shrine Hill. I've estimated that there are 9 acres of wetlands on Shrine Hill by reviewing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Freedom of Information Act, which you all have. This represents about 9%, or 5 actually. I support developing over 90% of Shrine Hill and protecting 5%. I support development in Silverton while conserving our natural resources. There is a win-win here. We can find it. I appreciate your time. If anybody out there has a question for me, I encourage you, approach me directly. Please stop writing personal statements about me. It's demeaning. Approach me personally. I'm here to talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just have one more.
We're only supposed to do one per person, but we'll have a closing public comment.
Can you all clarify when this all started, that it wasn't 2 days ago when in the meeting? Because I feel like that's very important.
Any other in-person comments? I will go to Zoom. If anyone who didn't speak changes their mind, we'll check in with you again after the Zoom comments.
Hey, everybody, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Melody Skinner, 43-year resident of Silverton. My comments at the last meeting about environmental choices ebbing and flowing seem to have brought up the subject of choosing brownfield actions for housing development over other cleanup. The comments were not made in the town meeting, but since I spoke about it here, I will address it here. Remember that choosing brownfields and housing is one of the choices that was available at the time. If you would like to know what I know about the other sides of this issue, contact me and I will fill in some of the blanks. I only intended to point out that our environmental issues are multifaceted. Good luck with your meeting tonight. I think you're going to need it. You will need a lot of wetland experts to settle this issue. Remember that other experts had said in the meeting that there would be many different opinions of what was going on with our wetlands. Good luck. I love y'all.
Thank you. Just a reminder, if you're on Zoom, please click the raise hand button so that we know you'd like to make a comment. Cam, if you unmute yourself, you have the floor.
Was that for Cam?
Yep, you're up.
Thank you. Yeah, my name's Cameron Spees. I've been a member of the Silverton community for about 5 years, approaching 6 here in the fall. But yeah, I just wanted to speak a little bit on the Shrine Hill wetlands specifically. I bought a piece of land there a couple summers ago, and I went through the whole process doing my due diligence to know that what I was buying was good. I went through with the engineer, city or county engineer, deemed that it was not avalanche hazard, no slope hazard, not up for historical review. So from there, I continued on to get my own data to see what was underneath the ground, what was I actually buying. I had a local excavator come over and dig test pits. We got as far down as we could with his mini excavator, about 7 to 8 feet. Everything looked great. From there, I moved on to hiring a geotech company to come up from Durango. Trotner Geotech is the name of that company. They came up and pulled soil samples from about 20 feet into the ground, and everything came back great. So I moved on to buying that piece of land under the premise that I would be able to build on it. So now that all this has sparked up and continued on through the winter, I'm at a pretty big fear of having basically put all of my money into this piece of land that at the time was a good buy because I did my homework. I found out what was under the ground. It was not wetlands. I have definitive evidence to prove that, and may get shut down from being able to build there now. So yeah, I guess just wanted to speak on fears of landowners who have done their homework, and if they're like myself, can't afford to just go out and buy something at these prices. I've spent the last few years trying to save up money so that I can build in the future, since it pretty much took all the money I had to buy that piece of land in the first place. But yeah, I just wanted to speak for other folks like myself and get our representation out there as well. So thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised on Zoom. Do we have any other in-person public comment? We'll go ahead and close public comment. We will be having another public comment at the end of the meeting. And we'll move on to the first item on our agenda, which is new business item 4A, a new special event application, Colorado Ride, August 28th, 2023.
So I was approached by event organizer Bill Plott, who's joining us tonight, to throw the idea out there to have a fun run bike race. It's not a race, it is a fun ride from based out of Durango, but they're going to come up to Silverton day one, head over to Pagosa Springs, Wolf Pass. This is a 5-day event scheduled to start August 28th. And working with Bill, as well as state and local officials, he's come up with a pretty safe plan in order to have their riders come and enjoy the mountains for a week. We do have Bill Plott on the line. I will let him introduce himself, as well as answering questions that you may have about the event and explain it better. Bill?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Bill Plott. I live in Arvada, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver. Colorado native. Love biking, love Silverton, love Durango, love that whole area. Been down there many times. We, my partner and I, Zach, came up with an idea for a ride that we want a 5-day tour where we really stay in the area, and we spend 3 nights in Durango, 2 nights in Pagosa. One of the first days to ride up to Silverton, and then we have everybody riding the train back. We bought tickets for everybody that had registered. Our registration actually closes in about 5 hours at midnight, and we have about 200 people registered so far. So that'll be the extent of it, minus a couple here and there. But the train is really the highlight. And I worked with, thanks to Nathan, put me in touch with Tiffany, and we will be using her property to stage, picking up the bikes, and we will take the bikes back, and the cyclists will take the train back to Durango. Then we continue on with our tour, which, as he mentioned, we'll do a loop around Durango. Then we'll go to Pagosa, and we'll go up Wolf Creek, and then come back to Durango. So we're excited about the first day. I know a lot of people are coming because of the train. We just signed up 4 wounded warriors today as part of the Invictus Foundation project. And they're excited because of the train. They usually do ride the Rockies, but they chose our ride this year because truthfully, because of the train. So we're really excited about all this. And we have hired a very upstanding emergency management team. They're paramedics on motorcycles. We have Centura accompanying us with an ambulance. So we have a really good medical plan, and we were, working for evacuation plan, and we have all the, some of the same things as Race the Train, but we're not a race, we're a tour. We will have mandatory, cutoff times so that people aren't strung out all over the course. And we also will implement some pull-out sections in case there's any traffic buildup. We will pull riders off the course and let traffic pass safely. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
And to clarify, this is not like Iron Horse. The road will be open to traffic, so rider safety was #1 priority. When it comes to the effects for citizens of Silverton and the town itself, it is minimal impact. The riders will be coming up Green Street and going, checking in and parking their bikes, picking up their bags at Tiffany Decay's lot on 12th Street by the train tracks. And the participants will be able to visit our town, shop locally, eat locally before they hop on the train and head to Durango. So the actual town will see very low impact. And Bill has worked diligently and at the request of Sheriff and EMS Director Tyler George to come up with a good safety plan for their riders as well in the county.
And just to add on to that, when we read their plan and I sat in on the meeting on June 28th, their EMS plan and the fact that they've hired EMS personnel to go with the tour. We were over the moon about that, and they've got all the support of CDOT and this Colorado State Patrol. And so it's a very, very good plan.
Due to the nature of it being its inaugural event, we did feel the need that if there is potential growth for this event, that we would go ahead and go through the special event application process, get them started out on the right foot. And Bill has been more than willing to go through that process with us.
I'm extremely supportive of events like this, so thank you very much for putting in all the time and effort to bring something like this to the region. I have a couple of questions. The first is, what's the decision framework around not closing the road for 300 to 500 riders? I know the Iron Horse is about the same number, sometimes quite a bit more, but I was just curious how that works.
Oh, I would love to close the road. CDOT won't let that happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was surprised to find out. I asked the same question. The Iron Horse is one of 2 events in the state that CDOT will close the road for a year. That is it.
Okay.
The vehicular traffic is too important, I guess, for them to close it. But that was my first question. And apparently they just do not do it. So, and Iron Horse has been going on for so long.
It's just coming.
They're grandfathered in, but yeah.
So then I think that the safety protocols of having Colorado State Patrol escort and EMS is really great. The only other thought that occurred to me is, what type of public notice is available? Are you able to work closely enough with CDOT to put like a day in advance traffic impact notice on the highway signs that are exiting Durango and entering Silverton and vice versa, so that people know to anticipate the traffic impacts? And can we send out a nixle to our community so that people know if they're trying to get to work or run an errand that it's going to be delayed? Or those types of
I'm sorry.
No, sorry, I was just rambling. Please go ahead.
Yeah, CDOT, the PR person, I'm spacing her name, is going to send out communications ahead of time, and then we're looking at using some of the variable signage to warn motorists that events on the road, both out of Ouray and out of Durango. So as well as the fixed signs, if they can, they will put something on those. It kind of depends on what other things might be going on in the time, because we're also at the same, unfortunately, the same time, the motorcycle rally is at the end of that week. So they're having a couple of messages they're going to have to kind of bounce back and forth. But yes, that is the plan, to do some VAR signs. And then we will also have signs that we've ordered, big 6-foot signs that will be posted on the southbound side of 550, coming out of, as you come in closer to Silverton and then up on the passes, so that southbound traffic knows there's a cycling event ahead, because we want to be sure that they don't go around corners too far and things like that.
And just to clarify, with this special event application and your approval tonight or denial, it is based off of just what is happening within the town limits, because we have no authority in the county. But with the notification within town, we will be notifying through the normal channels, newspaper, as well as our social media profiles, that there will be an event happening that day to watch out for cyclists. And there are no road closures with this application because they will be spaced out over a 7-hour period. So it, again, not a race. Everyone's going to take their own time, and rules of the road do apply.
Yep.
Any other discussion or questions?
Not for me. That's great. Thanks for doing this. Like the plan.
Okay.
I would like to say one more thing. Bill, thank you, and Zach, so much for your attentiveness to this application, and I look forward to working with you more.
Yeah, thank you so much for everybody, and hope the rest of your meeting goes okay. And if this event goes well, I'd like to work with you guys to do a kind of a stay and play at the end of our ride. So next year.
Before we move on, a trustee would need to make a motion to approve or
I'll
deny.
make a motion to approve the Colorado's Ride Special Event application. Second.
Thank you very much. Roll call, please. Trustee Edwards.
Yes.
Trustee Cranker.
Yes.
Trustee Harper. Yes. Trustee George.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Yes.
Mayor Furman. Yes. Motion passes 6 yeas, 1 absent. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Bill.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Like,
All right, the next item on our agenda is consideration of approval of the consent agenda. Nathan. Any questions or issues with the consent agenda?
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please. Trustee Edwards.
Yes.
Trustee Granger.
Yes.
Trustee Harper. Yes. Trustee George.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Yes.
Mayor Furman. Yes. Motion passes 6 yeas, 1 absent. Thank you very much. Next item on our agenda is staff reports.
And we are doing kind of a every other meeting kind of thing, so you'll just see my staff report in there this time.
Anything you want to highlight for us?
Making progress on the budget software. I finished my training on that. So the finance committee on Monday will get to see a little tutorial of our online system. A really cool feature of that is all of our checks will be live as well. So you'll be able to, and the public will be able to see kind of where all the money's going.
Exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Great. Any other questions on staff reports? All right, thank you very much. Next item on our agenda is committee reports. We had a personal and ordinance committee meeting on July 5th. We had 2 agenda topics. The first was to review a proposed noise ordinance overhaul. That was presented on behalf of the KSJC radio station, which is interested in loosening up some of our noise ordinance rules in order to benefit more public music opportunities hosted by nonprofits in the town. And they did a pretty thorough job of a proposed ordinance, but we asked for them to do quite a bit more homework to compare and contrast our existing ordinance with what they were proposing so we could understand what exactly they were asking for and what they were giving up. And we also asked for them to get the sheriff's input before coming back to us. And so I imagine we'll get a substantive update at the next Personnel and Ordinance Committee meeting after they've completed that homework. And then it would come to this board following a successful meeting then. We also talked about the steering committee for the municipal code rewrite, and Gloria put together a really great set of suggestions for what this citizen steering committee would include to help facilitate community engagement on the code rewrite, which will be starting later this year. And the committee, I think, wholeheartedly supported the suggestions by staff on what that would include. And I guess I'll kick it over to you for what next steps would be on that.
Yeah, so I had some follow-up from the committee that I have to follow up with community builders on, and then we'll bring it to the board for consideration.
Yeah, sounds good.
Did I miss anything?
No, it was good.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. So the next item on, are there any questions about either of those updates? Okay, the next item on our agenda is trustee reports.
We set a date for the trustee retreat.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Gloria did. So we'll have June 20th. All the Board of Trustees will meet for several hours in the evening, I think, and work our magic.
July.
Did I say June?
Yeah.
July. It's July, guys. Okay. Not gonna time travel for this one. July 20th. I should know that. It's my husband's birthday.
Birthday.
Whoops. Two things to celebrate, because I'm about using this platform as a way to celebrate things that are happening in the community. I think it's good for us. Just want to put a shout out for a really great 4th. We live on the hill, as everybody knows. We have moved there post all of the chaos on the hill, but I just think I wanted to give a huge shout out to the 4th of July committee, the fire department, all the volunteers that really made it a safe experience. It was very peaceful. There was just so much enjoyment had from our perspective. Our family really enjoyed the parade, and there were so many people out, and I think Patty Daly just really hit it out of the park with so many participants. So it was just fun to see everybody back, and really just a great event. So I wanted to just shout out to everybody that was involved, from the chamber to all the volunteers, 4th of July Association, fire department, the town, Nathan's work, coordinating everything, the fun run. It just really, really great community event. And then second piece, huge thing that's been in the pipeline is the Bakers Park groundbreaking. I think just celebrating that has happened and that's moving forward. I think that's a big milestone for those folks who've been working on it, and really going to be an asset to our community and just a celebration. I think both of these events highlight how much of an impact individuals can make in our community and how much individuals really contribute to this small town. So wanted to give a shout out to those community groups.
Next, and the groundbreaking will be on Saturday at 3 o'clock.
Yes.
Yeah.
At the trail up there.
At the trailhead on that side of town.
Our family is sadly out of town, so we won't be there, but just want to put a plug for it. Celebrate.
Fantastic. Anything else? Okay. We'll now move on to continued business. Item 9A, Kendall Deck Patio RFP responses.
At the June 12th regular Board of Trustees meeting, the trustees approved the release of an RFP for construction of the planned deck and patio at the Kendall Community Center. No responses were received by the submission deadline, so staff is recommending we extend that submission deadline until July 20th for review at the July 24th Board of Trustees meeting. I have fielded interest questions from 2 different firms. So hopefully by the 24th, we will have something for the trustees to review, assuming we extend the deadline.
Are you optimistic and hopeful?
I'm optimistic we will hopefully have 1 and possibly 2. It's a tough time of year to pin down contractors.
Yeah. Would someone care to make a motion to extend the RFP deadline to July 20th for the Kendall deck and patio update?
So moved.
Thank you. Roll call, please. Trustee Edwards.
Yes.
Trustee Cranker.
Yeah.
Trustee Harper. Yes. Trustee George.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Yes.
Mayor Furman. Yes. Motion passes 6 yeas, 1 absent. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is continued business item 9B, perimeter trail RFP, RFQ responses.
Additionally, at the June 12th meeting, the trustees voted to release an RFP for development of the perimeter trail. Mainly the planning, surveying, title search, design and engineering work, and the associated planning efforts. Staff was awarded a DOLA grant in the amount of $36,000 to complete the planning process. We had received 6 or 7 interested parties, but we only received 1 actual response to the RFP. That was submitted by Engineer Mountain Inc., which is operated by Lisa Adair. And staff is recommending the award to Engineer Mountain Inc. based on the merits of her professional qualifications, relevant project experience, local status of the firm, and willingness to complete the project at a significantly discounted rate as a community service. And I've worked personally with Lisa as well, and I know she is extremely diligent, and I think that that is going to really benefit the planning when we look at the perimeter trail, to be so diligent in our efforts before we break ground on anything.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, not only is she offering to work for, I believe, half of her rate, which is still less than normal professional engineers, but her just local knowledge, having been working in the town, and like knowledge of property and who owns what. And I think that she's a very good choice to do this. So I fully support this proposal.
I do too. I'm totally supportive of the proposal. I think Lisa does really good work. I think we've all worked with her. She's been in the area forever. Everything you guys have said. My only thing is, I know she's doing this, offering to work at such a discounted rate and as a community service. And I know that to be a responsible steward of public money, I shouldn't advocate for paying her more, but I just wonder if there's a way. I mean, this is her decision, but you know, should it get, I don't know, overly cumbersome, excessively
Maybe some sort of
complex.
bonus at the end or something?
Yeah, something like where we can, compensate her for her professional work at a professional rate. I'm gonna throw that out there. Sorry.
I think a typical engineer would charge closer to $200 an hour. Lisa typically charges around 100. She's proposing
Charging
50. The project is grant funded largely. So a potential consideration would just, if you wanted to raise the project budget to accommodate something like that, being that it is grant funded.
Right, yeah.
Essentially, it's a matter of how many hours it may take her to complete under the threshold of the project.
I just want to make sure she's fairly compensated for the professional work she'll provide.
I think the flip side is that we might not have been able to do this within the budget based on how complicated it might end up being, and that her rate may allow us to actually do this within the budget. But I am in support of paying a fair rate. And if it comes in under budget, having conversations.
Yeah, something like that. Like if she can get us, to the finish line and then the grant has some remaining funds or something, whatever that structure looks like. I just wanted to test the waters and see if we're open to considering. You have not made this request. I'm just speaking.
I did speak to a firm out of Durango that was interested initially, and they're initial response was add a zero, or you're missing a zero. So they decided not to bid.
Lisa, I mean, she just seems like she's coming in like to meet our budget and she knows the complexities and she knows the community and I think understands the vision really well. And like, it may not be able to ever happen without her help, but if there's a way, yeah.
And well, I think the one other thing that we should keep in mind is that we'll still have to pay professional surveyors. And
Yeah, right.
attorneys.
Right.
Can't handle that part. So that's going to eat up part of that budget as well.
Right.
To make sure that we're thinking of the whole project. But
And we did budget a little bit more in our legal for this project as well for attorneys.
Okay. Well, in any case, I'd make a motion to award to approve the award of the perimeter trail RFP to Engineer Mountain Inc.
Second. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Edwards.
Yes.
Trustee Cranker.
Yes.
Trustee Harper.
Yes.
Trustee George.
yes,
Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes.
Motion passes 6 yeas, 1 absent.
Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is continued business item 9C, resolution 2023-11. A resolution of the town of Silverton to adopt a traffic impact fee and to amend the fee schedule.
And so this resolution is a follow-up to the traffic impact fee ordinance that will be enacted on July 12th. I think we did our second reading on the 24th, I want to say, or earlier in June. And so this resolution officially adds the fee to our 2023 fee schedule.
Okay, I'll make a motion to adopt resolution 2023-11, a resolution of the town of Silverton to adopt a traffic impact fee and to amend the fee schedule.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Edwards.
Yes.
Trustee Cranker.
Yes.
Trustee Harper.
Yes.
Trustee George.
yes,
Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes.
Motion passes 6 yeas, 1 absent.
Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is continued business item 9D, ordinance 2023-09, an emergency ordinance of the town of Silverton for the preservation of health, peace, and safety to amend the municipal code of the town of Silverton, Colorado to establish wetland disturbance standards and associating permitting and regulations. Before we open up this topic, I've been told that some community members perceive a conflict of interest in my participation in the wetland related discussions. So I'm choosing to recuse from this wetland related discussion to avoid conflict with those community members, but state for the record that I don't believe an actual conflict of interest exists and that the basis of the perceived conflict of interest is not legitimate, in my opinion. Enjoy.
Oh, Matt, can you please promote TJ and Lucy? And Chris Mazer, CPS. Thank you. So I'm going to start by framing this out from March of this year, when the idea of a moratorium was on the table to help alleviate some of our development constraints and code conflicts with the master plan. We've seen this over the last couple of years. And so at the time, staff was anticipating a high volume of applications, and we proposed some interim fixes to the code prior to the full rewrite. The work plan included addressing timelines in which staff were required to review applications, policy initiatives for affordable housing, and infrastructure concerns. We did not get the flood of applications that we were expecting, but we have made strides on our work plan. So I have included the original memo in your packet with our progress. The March work plan proposed an emergency ordinance to address non-jurisdictional wetlands. This was in response to having spent a significant amount of time on 2 applications this winter and anticipating more complicated applications this summer. The ordinance before you was proposed as an emergency ordinance in the work plan. Although it has since been to the Planning Commission in May and the Personnel and Ordinance Committee in June, and has been published on the front page of our website for 2 months. The ordinance takes best practices from our community, from other communities, and is considered a standard non-jurisdictional wetland ordinance. Staff is not giving a recommendation on this ordinance and would like for the trustees to have a discussion before considering it. We have provided 5 options, A through F, and there are probably more options, but we still didn't feel like we had clear board direction. So the options are also there to help guide discussion. With Shane's recusal, since this is an emergency ordinance, it needs 3/4 of the entire board, not just those present, to be adopted, which would mean that we do not have enough board members to vote because we would need 6 affirmative votes for this ordinance to pass. So tonight we need to discuss, but at this point, we cannot pass this ordinance.
Thank you, Gloria.
Okay, so I'll give a little background on the ordinance because it came to the planning commission, as Gloria said. Well, so we started the wetland discussion with the 2 agenda items that we reviewed over the winter on the Gibson property and the Roberts Road. And that made wetland discussion really challenging because it was limited to the application specifically pertaining to those 2 projects. And we got through those 2 projects and worked really quickly to clarify that jurisdictional wetlands in Silverton remain protected through the federal jurisdictional protection programs. And then had some discussion about what to do about non-jurisdictional wetlands. And so this is the draft ordinance as a result of that discussion, which came in front of the planning commission, where the planning commission discussed it. I wasn't actually at that meeting. Jim, you were, but I'll just give a quick, I watched it on YouTube. I'll give a quick overview. So the planning commission reviewed this draft ordinance and discussed the ordinance. They didn't necessarily question the idea of using an ordinance to protect wetlands. So when, after the planning commission reviewed and recommended the ordinance with some feedback that's noted in the memo, it came in front of the P&O committee, the Personnel and Ordinance Committee, that was actually just Shane and me there that day. And at that time, we sort of took a step back and asked about, kind of asked the general question, like, is an ordinance the way to best protect wetlands? And if so, I think what we really did is we just kind of stepped back and we kind of discussed philosophically, like, is this how we want to go about protecting wetlands? And so normally what we would do in a P&O committee is a little bit more like what the planning commission did, which is to kind of pick apart the actual language of the ordinance and do what we did like with the noise ordinance just the other day, look at it, review it, send it back for revisions or get input from qualified experts, that sort of process. But since the P&O committee didn't really do that, it ended up we decided to put it in front of the Board of Trustees. That came, and so then what happened is a couple meetings ago, as the Board of Trustees, we discussed whether or not this ordinance, like, what did we want to do with it? It's been reviewed by the Planning Commission. It was presented to the P&O committee, but not necessarily thoroughly combed through. And the P&O committee kind of wanted it to come to the board. The board said, yep, we want to see it. Let's take a look at the ordinance. And so that's where we are tonight. So tonight we are looking at this ordinance. And I'll just say my 2 thoughts a little bit. So since the P&O committee meeting got a little bit, the discussion was long and thorough, but it didn't necessarily dig into the specific language and operational realities of what the ordinance would actually do. My notes on the ordinance, as I would have like with an ordinance review, are it's like kind of all marked up because that's kind of where we are now, not having had that P and O revision process. Like to my standard of like what I would say is sort of a thorough review of an ordinance. How I would describe that for me. And so I've come to the meeting tonight to discuss this draft ordinance, ready to discuss the language in it and what that might mean for protecting wetlands, what that might mean for property owners, and we can kind of comb through it. But I do want to just preface the discussion for me that I have a lot of notes that would typically have been reserved or, aired out in a committee setting. So we can go there and do that tonight if we want. And it sounds like our discussion can sort of take that tone anyway, because there's no decision making without more trustees, according to Gloria's update earlier. So that's the context and the background that I was prepared to share. Jim, you're also on those same two committees. I don't know if you want to add anything or tee it up differently.
You did a perfect job.
Okay.
Want to jump in?
Sure. I guess just one point of order. So will we have to vote to table this evening, or will we just? And we'll have to, there has to.
Exactly, Clayton. I was just kind of navigating this as we go, so.
And my question along with that question is like, is tabling our only option, or are there other options in the memo that we can, like, potentially we can't pass the ordinance, but we could do some of the other options? So what options are we allowed to add? What are our options?
Yeah.
Okay, so your options are anything but pass an emergency ordinance.
Okay.
All right. If you try to pass an emergency ordinance, you won't have the requisite 3/4 of all legislative members of the body, because you're missing, or 3/4 of all. So because you're a 7-member crew and the mayor has recused, you need the other 6. You're missing Trustee Bierma. Thus, you can't pass an emergency ordinance, but all other options are on the table.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so I just want to add to that, before we get into the options and the merits of some of the options. I know there's been a lot of talk around town about Shrine Hill specifically. And I just want to clarify that this ordinance would not shut down building on all of Shrine Hill. I believe one of our public speakers earlier commented that 90% of the hill will still be developable. Will be less than 8% that may be protected, but this emergency ordinance will protect other wetlands in the town of Silverton, and they are, they're so important for so many different reasons. After we started looking into this, I guess 4 months ago, when we had the two properties on the hill, I didn't realize how important wetlands were to the environment and the ecosystem. I think it's in our best interest to do whatever we can to protect them. But I did really want to point that out, that we are not saying no development at all on Shrine Hill. That is just not true.
In addition to that, I think there is a little misconception that protecting wetlands has been conflated or been kind of joined with Shrine Hill development.
Mm-hmm.
And we have other wetlands like that are not just on the shrine that would be included in a non-jurisdictional wetland ordinance. So yeah, I just wanted to be clear that this is not a Shrine Hill specific draft ordinance. This applies everywhere.
I've been doing some research. I'd like to jump in with some clarification around jurisdictional and non-jurisdictional wetlands and why the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers can even make these designations. It's having to do with the Clean Water Act. And if I mess this up, someone can correct me. I think I've done a good job with my research though. The Clean Water Act was enacted with the primary goal of protecting waters of the U.S., focusing on waters used in interstate commerce like navigable rivers and territorial seas. Under the Clean Water Act, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was granted the authority to regulate the discharge of pollutants and dredged or fill material into these waters. It includes wetlands in its jurisdictions that are adjacent to other jurisdictional waters, or if they have a significant nexus to such waters. Whether it's jurisdictional or non-jurisdictional has no bearing on if a wetland is signed wetland. None at all. It's just if it's designated and controlled by the Clean Water Act, and the Clean Water Act does not take into account ecology at all. Just wanted to throw that out there. I had one more thing actually. These are still true wetlands that provide ecological functions. These non-jurisdictional wetlands, they're just excluded from the Clean Water Act's protections, not because they are less valuable ecologically, but because they do not fit into that specific legal and regulatory criteria that's defined by the Clean Water Act. I know there has been some confusion about non-jurisdictional wetlands not being wetlands at all. And I just want to kind of address that, say they are still scientifically wetlands.
Yeah, and the possible new ordinance will spell this out. It refers to our use of the regional supplement to the Corps of Engineers Wetland Delineation Manual, and I read it. It was very long, and it was. I'm not a biologist, but it does absolutely, I mean, define what our wetlands are, whether or not, as Liv said, whether or not they're jurisdictional or non-jurisdictional. But after reading it and reading how they define wetlands, it just reinforced the idea that there is so much area, Shrine Hill, other places in town, that are not going to be included in this. So that's just one point I really want to hammer on, is that this is not an ordinance to just stop all development. It's an ordinance to protect very specific small keystone habitats within our city limits. There's also, I mean, there's been several cities and counties within Colorado that are moving this direction. The federal government has moved back and forth on, you know, how they protect wetlands, which wetlands are jurisdictional and non-jurisdictional. And there have been many communities that have decided that they don't want to, you know, they don't want their communities relying on the whim of what's happening at a federal government level. And so they're going ahead and they're putting in their own protections. And this is just a short list of some of the cities and towns that we found. We've mentioned Boulder, which Boulder did it in the 90s. Crested Butte, Telluride, of course, these are all, you know, bigger tourist cities, and, you know, they may have an easier time developing. All of these places also have more developable land. So we understand that that is a finite resource for us. But other places that have done it have been Larimer, Park County, Ridgeway has done it, Montrose has done it. I mean, there's Durango is working on one. And this is just what is becoming, I think, best practices amongst smaller local government, because again, we don't want to rely on the federal government and, you know, either who's in office or who's in Congress making these decisions. And if we decide that as a community that these keystone ecosystems are important to us, and I believe that I've read enough and I've heard enough that the science and data support that, then I think that it's in our best interest to do what we can to protect them outside of any federal mandate.
I agree with you, Tyler, and notably with places like Crested View, I've noticed that they basically have ordinances that use market levers to disincentivize building on non-jurisdictional wetlands, basically to avoid a tragedy of the commons. But there are still ways to build on or around for property owners who have these lands, and there are compromises that can be made with the town. So there is still a prioritization for private property rights, as well as the protection of these non-jurisdictional wetlands. We have a wide variety of options in front of us. Does anyone have any thoughts or strong opinions?
Well, so I was gonna let's hear from Dana and Jim. But I actually have some, I mean, if we're gonna talk about this ordinance, I think we need to dig into the language of the ordinance.
Sure. First and foremost, the why. Why are we doing this? Why are we here? What are we talking about? When this originally came up, as Sally so eloquently said, and so did Gloria, we as a town, we as a board, were put in a pickle. Essentially, the state and federal government, their designation expired. Didn't change the fact that the ground is wet. There's willows there, there's critters in the bush, and there's nothing there to protect it. There's nothing there to say what this is, what we're seeing with our own eyes, what we're walking through, and what's on the bottom of our shoes. This is an emergency ordinance, and it's being categorized as an emergency ordinance because there is nothing on the books currently. That is the only reason. That is the only reason. And that is to buy the town and us as a board of trustees the time necessary in order to work through and execute our new code rewrite. That's it. Yeah, is it scary to say emergency? Absolutely. Is it scary to people who think, holy smokes, I've got private property, I've got a wetland on there, and now they're saying I can't build. That is not what anyone else is saying. No one has said that. I'll be the first to sit there and say, I would never agree to something like that. But what we do need is language. We need something. And this is that something that we don't have currently. Is it perfect? No. We're going to have varying opinions. We're going to have varying discussions. And clearly tonight, there's not going to be any fireworks because we can't vote on anything. So this is going to be a nice, healthy, happy discussion of how we're going to move forward. And what we discuss up here is nothing we haven't talked about for the past 6 months. The opinions up here have not changed or varied very much. The information provided by locals and outsiders, professional opinions, are only there to assist in our decision-making and to assist us as a community and as a town to come to that best possible conclusion, not just for this ordinance, not just for the wetlands and the folks supporting that, but for the private property homeowners themselves. There has to be common ground. Gonna be wet. There's common ground.
I had to go there.
I went there.
Good.
But there has to be a give and take, and there has to be a compromise, and there has to be a balance. And I truly believe that this board, and I truly believe that the folks in this room, folks viewing tonight in your home, they all recognize that. And this will have a sunset, this emergency ordinance, when we get our code rewrite completed. And at that point in time, each and every one of you and your folks at home will have again the opportunity for your thoughts, for your opinions to weigh in on everything. And we'll have these discussions all over again. But I truly do understand the reluctancy to want to approach a topic like this when the very first word and headline is emergency. That's scary as shit. I'm just gonna say it. Woo.
This is on YouTube.
It's on YouTube, and I hope everyone at home is watching. Because this is important. This is important for our community. This is important for the future. We are setting precedent. But more importantly, this is important to those private property and those homeowners and those folks that want to build eventually on the hillside. And this is not something that's being taken lightly. So at the risk of being redundant, I'm just going to stop and I'm going to kick the can down to Dana.
Thanks, Jim. I'm learning to wait to speak and it's practice for me. I just wanted to thank folks that have showed up, folks that are online, for the board, for the respectful discussions we've had. I think we've all learned a lot in the last 6 months. We're much more informed. I think town staff, we've all learned a lot. Process-wise, policy-wise, where we're going, where we want to go. I would just encourage all of us and just speak to all of us as community members that as we're having this discussion that could and can polarize us, that we remind ourselves that we're all here for a reason. We have a lot of common shared purpose here in this community. I have pretty much been on the phone about this topic for 10 hours today. And I told my boys when they woke up this morning, I said, I'm going to go to a meeting. I'm going to talk about this all day. I'm going to go to a meeting. I'm going to make a decision or have to make a decision, but now we are. That no matter what is going to make people frustrated or angry or annoyed, regardless of what I say or what my decision is, and people that I care about and respect their opinion. So I appreciate all those who've shared their opinions with me, who've been thoughtful. And I think our community is very thoughtful. And I would encourage us to continue to be kind, to attribute the best intent to each other as we have these conversations, and to seek understanding and compromise. So as I've reflected on this whole experience over the past 6 months, like I said, I think we've learned a lot. Again, for the community's benefit, this all started in a format in which we were really only able to talk about a particular project. And so we had a lot of trouble in being able to talk about what is the bigger picture of where we're heading when we are balancing priorities of development in Silverton, increasing housing stock. We need housing of all kinds. We don't just need apartments and town subsidized housing. We need housing of all kinds that locals can live in. And balancing our priorities in the master plan of protecting environmentally sensitive areas. These are all things that our community has stated as priorities. And now that we're getting into like the details of working out what does that actually mean in our code, in our practice, in our decision-making, these feel like they're sometimes in conflict. I'm optimistic that we can move through how we resolve this conflict. The ideal that I see, and that I've heard from a lot of folks from different perspectives, is if we get to a place where through our code rewrite, we have community involvement and input. We hear from property owners, landowners, we hear from conservationists, we hear from folks that are kind of advocates and animated about the topic of preserving wetlands in particular. We hear from some outside experts that can really speak to us concretely about how much land in town are we actually talking about? What are the characteristics of this land? How many people does it actually affect? This process of having this conversation to then get to a code or an ordinance that has a balance of preserving property owners' rights or potentially buying that land from property owners and preserving environmentally sensitive areas, I think we want a process that looks something like that, right? That involves all those kinds of people. And I've heard from lots of folks in the community that have said, why haven't you had an expert? And why haven't you had someone talking about specific areas? And why haven't we had a community input discussion? Part of that is because we're not to our code rewrite yet, right? That there's kind of channels for that. And as much as we hate the slowness of that. That's kind of where we are. Our staff has already knocked out so many high priority items, and this is super high priority. And it's also just one of the many high priorities that we all have been working on. So if that's the ideal process, community engagement, expert weighing in feedback on what land we're actually talking about, a process by which the community can say, this is super high value and high priority to us for these ecological reasons. This area isn't so much. This affects these landowners. How do we raise money to deal with the fact that you might be telling someone that their land is worth different than what it used to be? That's an ideal process. That's down the road, we've been told, right? That we don't have a lot of mechanisms to make that happen quickly, despite how much maybe we all would like to. I've been saying, okay, what are the policy levers we can pull if we have, on the one hand, do nothing? Status quo, our current code. Our current code, as we found, didn't really even allow us to have a discussion with the developments that were in front of us of, could you site your house in a slightly different area? Could you do this differently? We couldn't even have those discussions because there was nothing in our code to allow us to have a conversation around potential protection of an area that potentially we wanted to protect. So we had nothing, we can keep with nothing. We've talked about extreme options like a moratorium, which is a big word with like a capital letter, right? Which freaks a lot of people out. I don't think is particularly useful for our community because I think it's harmful for our economy. I think regardless of whether we use it on a small scale or a big scale, it carries connotations that all of a sudden like builders don't want to build here, or tradespeople aren't working here. I think it just kind of creates a cascade of effects that are unintended consequences, but we've talked about it. Should we just pause everything while we can get all of our ducks in a row and figure things out? Should we have an ordinance that's imperfect, but kind of pumps the brakes, but still will require a lot of staff and board review, right? This is, again, one of the many things that's on our plate to review. And we're having to decide, do we dedicate this much time to it, or do we dedicate this much time to something else that's high priority? And so I've been stuck in a lot of these conversations because I think, to Sally's point, this ordinance is not really ready for public consumption. There's a lot of issues with it. And I'm sure Lucy could speak to that, TJ could speak to that, Gloria could speak to that, Clayton could speak to that. We all probably have our own comments. Sally has all her written up notes. I have all kinds of comments. I've heard from folks that, you know, significantly support in preserving all wetlands that have comments on it. So it's a very imperfect ordinance. And I think for me, the discussion right now is it the appropriate tool to use in the absence of something else? I hate us continuing to kick the can down the road. I think that drives staff crazy. I think it also drives the community crazy. But we still keep hearing, but we're not quite there yet. The community hasn't really been able to be involved and weigh in. You know, we haven't had a public process since emergency ordinance. So there's so many issues with kind of how we've kind of been backed into a corner to deal with this, that I think nobody's really satisfied in this discussion and how it's proceeded. And so we're kind of in this like messy point where we have a great master plan that there's a lot of buy-in to, and we have a code that doesn't fit it. And staff and the board and the community, we're all having to try to like muddle through how we have this code that doesn't really give us the tools we want and a master plan that we really like and have to work out the details. And we're going to get there. I'm super optimistic that we're going to get there. Your staff has put so much time into effort into like leading the vision to get us there, but we're not there yet. So I'm asking you to be patient with us. So that's kind of where I am. An ideal process looks like what I've heard from a lot of you guys, what I've heard on the phone of community input, expert feedback, board discussion, and the opposite end of that spectrum is do nothing and keep the status quo until we get there. And we have kind of these policy levers in the middle. And I think maybe it's worth having a discussion of like, are we somewhere in the middle? And do we want to pull any of those policy levers? Or do we look at what's in front of us, not quite ready for public consumption, but it is where it is, or the status quo until, again, we get to where we are. And this may not be an emergency, right? We thought there were going to be a ton of applications coming down the pipeline. It hasn't quite played out that way. I suspect lots of folks out there feel very uncertain. People don't like to build houses or break ground when it's very uncertain about what outcome they're going to get to and what time frame they're going to face. And so even with doing nothing, we may have a little bit more freedom and time than we think to have a more thoughtful, expertly informed, community informed discussion. So I think we have a lot of options on the table here, beyond just discussing. And right now we can't pass this ordinance in front of us. That's my very long-winded spiel of ideal and where we are and how we got here. Bringing y'all up to speed.
Nice, thanks, Dana.
It might not have been coherent, but
Thank you.
You look ready.
I think too, I wanted to say one more thing for the community's benefit is that even though we have a master plan and we have a code that don't completely align, I think it's worth remembering that we've done a lot in the last year since we adopted the master plan to do some things to prioritize the goals in the master plan. We're working on this. I mean, the code rewrite in and of itself that we have an RFP, we got a grant to be able to do that. So we can have someone, an expert, help us. But we also have worked on allowing ADUs to be used by right. That directly can affect affordable housing. It doesn't mean they're going to pop up immediately, but it makes it easier in the process. We have streamlined the process for use subject to review. So it's much more straightforward for staff. I think it's more straightforward for the applicant because we're not, noticing public meetings before they even have a completed packet ready for their application. That's one way that we're working to try to streamline processes, make it easier to build the things that the master plan says we'd like to build. We've also done much better work on making sure that we have a process for jurisdictional wetlands to be protected. We've streamlined things so that we make sure that we have a check that people are going through the Army Corps of Engineers to make sure that they are delineating or making a determination if their area is potentially in jurisdictional wetlands. And so I just think acknowledging the things we have done to try to align our code to the master plan is worth mentioning, even though we still have more to come.
So I think it would be so convenient and much more relaxing if we could be able to look at an ordinance like this and say, I like wetlands, let's protect them. Okay, check, I vote for this, approved, protection of wetlands complete. Let's move on to composting, or let's move on to a noise ordinance, or, it would be so convenient for these ordinances to kind of work that way and check it off the list and just say this is a neat and easy thing. If you like wetlands, you approve this ordinance. If you like development, you don't. And I think along with Dana's disclaimer, in the spirit of disclaimers, I don't think that's how this process will work. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. And I do want to acknowledge that this ordinance, any ordinance is one approach to solving problems in town. It's like the pen and paper type of approach. It's the same as housing. So we're like, okay, great. We want to increase housing. We do the ADU ordinance. That's a pen and paper approach versus digging a hole in the ground and building a building. So neither one of those alone fully solves the problem. I very much see that in what we're talking about tonight. To start on the first page, it says it's an emergency ordinance. I think Dana's and Jim have kind of explained why that happened. It was sort of a shortcut because we thought we were under the gun. There are currently no applications. I'm wondering if at this point, calling it an emergency ordinance hasn't necessarily saved us any time. And if we can, my question is if we can strike that language and put it into a first reading, second reading, to again, create some more public engagement, get some feedback and run it through our regular systems. I think that helps set us up for a better product in the end. I think that I think that on the first page of the ordinance, you know, we need to all agree that, so I'm just gonna lift out some things, I think, for discussion and just for anyone who likes to fold laundry and watch these meetings on YouTube, for some things to consider in the ordinance that we wanna just, and I don't think this is an exhaustive list, but in number one, we would need to agree that the procedures used to identify wetlands are those described in the regional supplement to the Corps of Engineers Wetland Delineation Manual, Western Mountains, Valleys, and Coast Region. That's what Tyler was referring to earlier. It's a really lengthy document. It does really clearly define what we're talking about. I think it's worth, you know, deciding that and having agreement that that's what we use. And I'm just gonna like kind of blow out here. So Lucy and TJ hop in at any point if I like misread or misconstrue or if I've misunderstood. It's in all capitals and underlined. It's not the most friendly reading material. So, okay, here we go. So that kind of starts it out. Then in number 3, I just want to acknowledge that throughout the process executing a disturbance permit, which is what a property owner would apply for or take out in the event that there is evidence of wetland that's non-jurisdictional on someone's property. The final kind of step there in the application the application procedure is, let's talk about this. The application procedure, there's some, you know, logistical, like it's in writing. They submit it in writing along with the fee set forth by the fee schedule. I think later on we'll hear that that's $500. The disturbance permit will be approved by the Board of Trustees following review and recommendation by the Planning Commission. So the permit goes to the Planning Commission. And then comes to the board. The application procedure, it includes required information. They're referred to by the town clerk that reviews and returns and recommends. Before any action is taken on a disturbance permit, a public hearing is called at the Board of Trustees, and finally a Board of Trustees is rendering the decision. So it continues to put the Board of Trustees in the seat of ultimate decider on you know, development that happens on land, on someone's property. Moving on to number 4, that is in 4A is where I wanted to kind of highlight that that's the minimal, it establishes the minimum acceptable standard for the wetland disturbance. Wetland standards are established to benefit the valley of the wetland. And so prohibiting soil disturbance in wetlands 25 feet from a body of wetland. And so I think in this instance, the Planning Commission had a healthy discussion on that number. I think if we think about our lots in our town, you know, 25 by 100, 50 by 100 buildable, 2 buildable lots, a 25-foot setback is really significant if you're trying to build on 2 lots. That's an instance, you know, I think about some of the property that's kind of in the 18th, 19th, you know, Cement Street end of town where there are littler lots or pocket lots, you know, of developable area where someone would be pretty pinched with the 25-foot setback versus someone on the Shrine Hill who potentially owns like a city block, and that's no big deal for them. They can just go ahead and set back their, you know, property 25 feet. So I think that's something worth talking about and deciding if that's the number. I think moving on to the next page, I actually wrote on that letter. Let's see, it must be B, within the town of Silverton. In item number 2, independent survey required. So on this paragraph has a few words for us, I think that we would want to really talk about. So if there is any evidence that a proposed development may contain wetlands, the applicant shall prove. So this is, we want to think about that too. Like it's on the private property owner. It's on the applicant to prove and provide a wetland survey prepared by, and I think this is also something I want to ask about, is qualified consultant. So we've experienced an application where we had all kinds of qualified consultants giving us totally different information, 180 degrees from each other. So we may need to look at like how do we define a qualified consultant? And then it says, the boundary of the wetland will be determined utilizing the methods outlined in the regional supplement to the Corps of Engineers Wetland Delineation Manual. I don't know, but Tyler, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Like, we've heard a little bit in our learning process about, I'm going to call them, for lack of a better word, like the grading of a wetland. I don't want to really call it high quality, high functioning, like whatever it is. Like, let's say we have the 5-star wetland and we have the 1-star wetland. I don't know that the manual delineates like the 5-star versus the 1-star. So if we were trying to say like, this is the super high quality one, we really know, you property owner, you just happen to be, you hit the jackpot, you have a 5-star.
And that's where it gets a little bit difficult, because there are the Army Corps manual really just goes into, let's just define this as a
right,
or not.
Right.
Now, there are other services in the state, and some of the other counties and cities have adopted them as well, to figure out, like you said,
yeah,
is it worth, that does raise the question, or, you know, that could bring a whole slew of other problems in that you have to bring in, oh, we're not just going to use this manual, we now have to.
Want to know.
Yeah. That said, I think there is some importance in figuring out, like, is this wetlands dying or dead, or like, is it non-existent anymore, or almost non-existent? And we would prefer to save this one. So I think there's some value to it, but I think it also adds, it could add some complexity that might take much more time.
And it's not clear to me in this ordinance that, you know, it would be like, whether you have a 5-star or 1-star, you're going to be subject to finding your consultant.
There's no nuance.
Right. And then I also am I am uncomfortable with a qualified consultant. I think that needs some further definition. I think that the language in 3 works. It says the area of disturbance shall be limited to the minimum amount necessary to achieve the intended purpose. I see the spirit of that. That's what we were looking for when we were working with the property owners, of like, how can we ask you to just shift your property a little bit this way? And how can we do this? But I think, again, this is really vague. So like, to achieve the intended purpose for me is a 5-car garage. So, you know, I'm not sure like how that holds up throughout a variety of different cases that may come before us, and how clear that is for a property owner. In number 4, prohibited disturbances to wetlands. We can come back to this, but I am interested in, like, that list is all just wetland disturbance. So I don't know why we're necessarily naming the prohibited ones, like grading, stripping, soil disturbance. Like, that sounds like the definition of disturbing wetland to me. Permitted disturbances, this one gets really tricky. So this is number 5. And I'm going to go to the next page. So 5B is a permitted disturbance. The proposed activity is the minimum necessary to achieve access to the property or provide utility service to the property. So this sounds to me like infrastructure. And that sounds like a permitted disturbance of the wetland is building your road to get there, or bringing in a power line and the power company needs to, you know, get the lift up there. And so you can kind of go across for that reason. So I'm not sure that language is clear, or if it's really in the spirit of preserving a wetland. We've had a lot of input on this, and I think this is where, you know, as a board of trustees, like, unfortunately, as uncool and kind of be that as it may, the denial of the disturbance permit would result in unconstitutional taking of property. This is a really hot button. You know, I almost hesitate to say it out loud. It's really, that is a really heavy statement and something for the town to seriously consider. I think having that language and like, how does that language affect us legally, and what sort of vulnerability does it create, or is that like all the protection we need? I think that's something for us to really discuss and understand. D is the most, I think, if we're trying to find clarity and streamline our processes, D is really vague. The proposed activity is A, primarily for the promotion of safety, health, and general welfare of the Silverton community, and B, the public benefit is greater than the impact to wetlands. So this seems really difficult. This just seems to set us up as a board to have some really opinionated, emotional, and incredibly challenging conversations, because I may believe that an ice rink is absolutely a greater public benefit than the wetland, and it should go over along the Cement Creek where we dump snow right now. And I just believe that in all of my heart. And I'm going to come up against a wetland, or is a house of greater benefit than the wetland and we don't have a grade for the wetlands. So we don't know if it's a 1-star and we don't know if it's a 5-star. And so now we're having a discussion about a project that sounds to me exactly like the one that we just had this winter with no clarity. So D is problematic. Okay, I don't have to keep going, but I will just keep going a little bit. Let's see. The town disturbance criteria. Okay, so then we move into 6, the disturbance criteria for disturbing a wetland. This is kind of like the town may allow a disturbance of a wetland or a wetland setback if the disturbance activity meets all of the following criteria. So I think we would want to really examine that list and determine, is that the criteria that we're comfortable with? Okay, then we have, I think this looked like a little bit challenging in terms of staff administration. E, the town administrator or designee may waive the submittal requirement for one or more of the listed requirements if the town administrator or designee determines that there's no evidence of the presence of the resource or resources on the parcel or lot proposed for development. So that makes, I think it gives administrative control to determining wetland presence. But I think that's another area for discussion. And I'm almost at the end. I'm on the last page. Okay, and I think this last page has a lot of discussion items. So let's see, okay, mitigation requirements. So this is another thing that kind of, I think we were looking for after we worked with the applications this winter of like, okay, you're going to go ahead and do it. What can we make you do that would, equal out the, disturbance? So that's in terms of mitigation. And the mitigation requirement that we have in this ordinance, is 1-to-1. So the property owner, let's say they decide, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and develop this property. I can work with the setbacks. I've gone through the disturbance permit process. I have all the approvals I need. I'm charging ahead. Here I go, I'm digging my hole. And so I'm going to mitigate and try and restore a wetland someplace else. So the language of this says, the loss of wetland shall be compensated for by replacing or substituting the lost areas in terms of both quality and quantity. Restored or created wetlands should be considered on site first. So if you have wetlands somewhere else on your property, because maybe you own 6 lots and you have plenty of space to restore in the proximity, or, you know, I'm a little confused. Does it have to be under? Okay, sorry, let me keep going. Then in close proximity to the impacted wetland area, in an area of similar type and function of the impacted wetland. So is that on your private property? Is that on public property? Is that designated by the town? How do we decide what that wetland property will be? And do we get property owners' permission? Do we have a bank of wetlands that the town owns and we say, this is for people who need mitigation? And then here, the next part that's a little concerning is the required ratio of new wetlands to permanently impacted wetlands shall be 1:1. That's a number we should talk about. A fee in lieu for wetlands replacement may be considered if no feasible alternative is available. I think fee in lieu really favors a really wealthy developer who can come in and pay whatever they need to pay. And so to me, this sounds like if you can go through all of the process and you can pay for your consultants and your experts and your lawyers, and you're willing to put the time in to present to the board, and you're a wealthy developer, you will just pay the fee and mitigate your wetland disturbance that way. And then the other tricky part here is this sentence: the fee shall be based on the estimated cost of construction for the creation of improvements to other wetlands that are similar in size and type in a location selected by the town. Like, should the town be the one selecting that location? And is that something that we want town administration to be doing? And then the applicant shall be responsible for obtaining the cost estimate prepared by a qualified wetlands consultant. So applicants responsible for the cost, but they need to pay someone with experience in compensatory wetland mitigation in San Juan County. Potentially, I see a conflict of interest there. I mean, I'm not sure that we have, I mean, I know that we have a lot of experts in our county. I think that's a little problematic to require the wetland mitigation in San Juan County, which we've acknowledged wetland mitigation in San Juan County is difficult to be successful at.
One of the real problems I had with a lot of.
Yeah, so this
when they
mitigation
talk
option,
about-
I think, is horrible.
When they talk about restoration or reclamation, we've had people speak to that in public meetings, and I've also spoken to a lot of people at different agencies throughout the state that say restoring and reclaiming, especially high mountain wetlands, is extremely difficult, and they've not had high success rates. So I'm not sure how well this mitigation section is going to work.
Yeah, and is the cost of the wetland mitigation, like, is 100% of that cost the right amount? Should a developer pay 150% of the cost? How is that cost determined? What criteria are we using to determine that cost? Is it potential? You know, I see potential for, like, well, your wetland's going to cost $1,000, but we really don't want any development over here. So we're going to charge this person $10,000 to, you know, how do we create some equity and clarity there in that? I think we just need to, that's problematic. There's a lot of, I think that's actually just one of the most problematic numbers for us as a town board. And then finally, I think in number 9, I guess I'm looking for, like, the penalty. So let's say that somebody just decides to go ahead and do what they're gonna do, and they haven't followed the right process, and whoops, I made a mistake. So sorry. This has happened in the town of Silverton, and we now just have to go back and try and fix it. So I'm wondering like what sorts of penalties, or what about just unintentional? So like someone who has the big lot, they said, I have no plan to develop this part of my lot. It's the wetland part. Their plans clearly show the development happening on the other part of their lot. But then as the contractor's delivering the trusses, they accidentally disturb some of the wetland that they weren't going to disturb. Is there a penalty for that? What do we do about that? And actually, now that I'm saying that out loud, does that person even need to pull a disturbance permit? Because if they don't plan on building on the part of their lot, they don't plan on disturbing wetlands, and they have enough of a lot, they have a huge amount of land somehow. Are they subject to pulling a disturbance permit? And so ultimately what I noticed as I ran this through for a couple of like different cases of, how would this look for someone with property on the Shrine Hill versus how does this look for someone with 2 lots over on Cement Street? I started to wonder that about, it really made me think that if you have deep pockets, if you're the exact person that we are trying to prevent from building an enormous second home on the Shrine Hill, you have everything you need to go ahead and build your home. You have the blueprint right here. You're like, okay, I hire my lawyers, I hire my experts, I get my qualified consultant, I pay the fee in lieu, or I find my mitigation. And it really favors, I think, that sort of developer versus someone who owns a couple of lots that are potentially non-jurisdictional wetlands and may have evidence of, they're going to have to go through the disturbance permit process because they have some characteristics or their property's meeting that criteria, but it just makes it a whole lot more expensive for them to build their house. And so, and maybe we're okay with that, maybe that's what we want to sign up for, and we want this ordinance to do that. But if we don't, we have to change the language in this ordinance. I win. I think I talk more than you, Dana.
Gold ribbon.
I'll stop.
Are you sure?
We put a lot of thought into this.
Like-
I just have to say, we put a lot of thought into this.
I have a question for Gloria and Clayton. Is he still there? Nope, there he is. Fine mustache.
I know, nice shave.
We received. First and foremost, thank you.
No, thank you for
Thank you.
listening. I appreciate it. And that would normally be committee work. Apologies.
I want to get crazy. We received about 6, 10, 12 emails today. Very eloquent, very direct. Notes from everyone here in the audience and those of you online that had direct questions, that had direct thoughts, potential fears. Have we answered those? Am I allowed to engage the public? Am I allowed to engage everybody that's here tonight?
Technically.
Since we're not voting, that's why I'm asking for permission, because I really think that y'all have been so patient, you've been so kind, and are we answering your questions? For those of you at home as well. Have we alleviated your fears?
Are we allowed to answer?
I don't know, that's why I'm asking.
Trustee Harper, there's nothing in the rules that says you cannot engage. It's not a public hearing, so there doesn't have to be necessarily public engagement. But as a board, if you decide you want to field questions and talk to the audience, there's nothing that disallows it. Just keeping in mind, it has to be done equitably and without structure in place, you know, you're kind of winging it, and that's fine. You just need to make sure if you're going to do it, then you go to the end. Everybody gets to have a voice if you want to answer questions.
What you're saying, there is an option here where we have a work session. That would be, oh no, but then we don't have public comment. That's why I was thinking first reading, second reading. But carry on.
You can always invite public comment at any point that you want to. There's nothing that precludes it. I'll say that.
Thank you. My thought in asking that is there were direct questions, direct fears, trepidation. Are we answering your questions so that we have alleviated that for you, and that everyone here tonight on television at home, do y'all feel comfortable? Do we feel better about moving forward? We have Clayton online, we got Lucy there. We got TJ, Chris, everybody's here. Do you guys have questions for us?
Let me say really quick, I really like the idea of getting feedback. I think to Clayton's point, I would love for it to be elicited and maybe we have time limits so we can give everyone to speak, but I think I like that.
We got parameters in place.
Yeah.
Should we do a 3-minute time?
Yeah, or even shorter. Yeah, knowing that it's already 9 o'clock. But in all sincerity, we went point by point. Have we answered your questions?
I think we hope.
JP Stan.
Yes, you have answered. So I think that.
Do you feel better?
After you hear your discussions, I do think that it is an emergency if we don't have anything in place at the moment to protect the wetlands.
So your comment earlier was, your question was, is this actually an emergency?
And
you just changed your position, and I thank you for that.
Yeah, no.
That's awesome.
Clarity is everything, and there was a lot of things I wasn't clear about. I stated that in the beginning.
Yeah.
So after hearing what you had to say, and I'm so glad that we stuck it out because it's hot as heck.
I'm glad as well.
I do agree that if there is nothing in place to protect them at the moment, then it is very, very, very much an emergency.
We have a Zoom hand raised.
Before we jump on Zoom, is there anyone else? I got a hand raised in the back.
I have 2 questions. If to what Sally spoke to earlier, and it's not an emergency, do you need 5? You have to.
Yeah.
If it's not an emergency anymore, that's for, I guess, the future. And 2, to bring up something from the past about 100% from private property rights and 100% for wetlands. If you zoom out, like what has been spoken to, the Shrine Hill is 5%, which there's science, but I'm not a scientist. But when you zoom in, you will potentially 100% take away private property builder. And that you kind of spoke to that earlier with financing, money going back and forth, but that's going to happen, I think. And so because this is an ongoing conversation, you have to get okay with that, because that's going to happen. Because if we're going to protect wetlands like the community wants to, that's a definitive. And you got to make it better that, because if we're going to protect them, we can't build on them, and that's a private property violation. So to wash your feet, I guess, and that's what we want. If we're going to protect wetlands, that's what has to happen. So, and I think it's just a hard conversation to have. So how does that work?
I think what I like to see with the community is that discussion, because it is a prioritization. So, right, if we're going to talk about protecting wetlands, that might have a financial implication for the town, for the community, for you as taxpayers, right? It may mean that your town staff is pursuing a grant for land banking instead of pursuing a grant for affordable housing. We have to have those hard conversations. We have to make trade-offs because we can't do it all. Our staff is amazing. They do a lot. They do way more than a little town of 700 people could expect. But those will be trade-offs. There will be financial implications. I totally agree with you that, like, if we're talking about balancing these priorities and determining that some areas are worth protecting for a variety of reasons, they're 1-star, 5-star, 3 stars. And we also are considering that those are currently privately held lots that have been platted for development in the town. the town board, the town community has to reckon with that. And we have to decide, will we put our money where our mouth is? Will we find people to do a conservation trust? Will we raise money? Will we get grants? But there will be trade-offs with that. My question in this board all the time is, what are we giving up? If we're talking about this, what are we not talking about this? If I'm spending my whole day talking about this really important issue, I'm not spending my day thinking about another important issue to town, right? There's always going to be trade-offs. It's not a zero sum all the time, but there will be trade-offs. So this ordinance doesn't really get at that prioritization. And that's been my problem all along, is we haven't been able to have the conversation as a community, like community builders process was so effective, to actually get us to prioritize and say, these areas are non-jurisdictional wetlands in town, according to this expert that 90% of us trust. And these wetlands that are non-jurisdictional have these varying values to us, and having that discussion. And then moving to the next point of discussion of, based on their determination by the community, by the experts, by the prioritization, what are we going to pay for them? How much do we really value preservation and conservation, and what are we willing to pay for them?
Well, and that's where I think, and to reiterate, I've said this before in meetings, where we have these different options in how we protect wetlands. We have an ordinance before us that puts the onus on, we go applicant by applicant. So we don't have to do anything. It seems cheap and free and easy. Like, it seems like I'm just want to check that box and be done with it, because it's on the applicant. We don't have to, we can wait until someone wants to develop their property. We don't have to prioritize 5-star wetlands. We can just sort of go about this on a, plot by plot by plot, versus looking at the town of Silverton, naming, like Dana said, with our 90% trusted wetland expert, these are the 5-star wetlands. They are right here. We can see them. On my map, I see jurisdictional wetlands. It's so obvious. It's like right there on the deal. And we could do that and say, okay, actually, it turns out that this is a really high value 5-star wetland, and it's partially on a platted street. And the town of Silverton can easily take care of that because we own that property. And it's partially on some BLM land, and it's partially on this private property owner's land. And then we would say, okay, that's a 5-star wetland. We've prioritized this. It's going to cost $94,000 to pay for it. Let's get $94,000 and buy that wetland. And then we know that really important property, it's just a different approach, I think, is what I'm saying is, like, this property by property, I think, has more complexity to it than meets the eye. And it demands a high level of engagement from the community, property by property by property, from property owners currently who are uncertain about what's happening, from the staff as they process the applications, and from us as a town board that go for months, listening to these applications, which hopefully that can come to an end. That's sort of one approach. The ordinance paper pencil approach. I think, if that's what we want to sign up for, okay, let's go into it wide-eyed and bushy-tailed and know exactly what we're doing and what the consequences potentially are and the unintended consequences. Another approach would be to purchase property that we've identified, and we go all in on that. And I'm up for that. Like, if the community identifies it as a priority, I'm not going to sit here and say no.
Can I jump in real quick? Because Jim opened for public comment and we've had people with their hands up on Zoom.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not.
I want to make sure that they get a chance.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Apologies, public commenters.
Knowing that this is a temporary until we can get the overall work completed. I don't want to go down rabbit holes buying up people's land. Not that it's not a bad idea. I'm not
saying I'm not go down.
I'm not
I'm
pursuing
putting it
anything
out
like that.
there.
What I'm saying is I want to engage the public. Jesse and Zach had a hand up at one point. Emily had a hand up at one
Oh
point.
my gosh.
I want to hear from everybody. I want to make sure that we're answering your questions at home. I want to make sure that we're answering your questions here in public. And again, the reason we're doing this, the why, is because there is nothing currently on the books to protect anything and to delineate anything from anything. So
Except for jurisdictional.
this is for the community. This is for the town. This is for each and every one of you, whether you're at home, whether you're here in public, this is for all of you. And this is why I think it's so important that we hear from all of you. So those of you online that had your hands up, don't put your hands down. Ask those questions. There's no such thing as a bad question because I ask them all the time. So please.
Okay,
Cole's up.
Emily?
Cole's up.
Cole down.
Oh, sorry, Cole.
Cole, I think you're muted.
Cole, if you can, oh.
There you go.
Got it. The floor is yours.
Excuse me. All right. I mean, I wish there was a little bit more time for the trustees to be limited to their times as we are as well. So with that being said, there was a brick factory up there. There's people who have been forging up there for many years. There is a survey that should be done by the town. Where's the survey? Where is all these things that promote you guys to say that this is a wetland? The Army Corps of Engineers have obviously said this is not a wetland. Where is the survey? Get yourself together, whoever is doing this, and please put this together. And then please put your ordinances to the point, as I have to do with the whole entire lighting ordinance. And I'm working on that, and I have to run a business as well. The businesses in here in this town are striving. You guys took that a lot away from us. So put yourselves together, make a survey. Put yourselves where the Army Corps of Engineers and the federal government has put themselves in our community. Again, we are a economical area of development. Thank you. I appreciate you. I really do appreciate all you guys for what you do for this community. And I respect every one of you guys. I know I have done wrong in the past, and I've tried to recall some of you. I respect you guys now, some of it, of all you guys. I've learned to respect all of you. So please take in consideration of these things I have said. And I appreciate y'all. Good night.
Thank you, Cole.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Emily. There she comes. All right.
Hi, can you hear me?
Emily, we can.
Great. I'll even turn my screen on here. Or maybe I won't. Okay, hi. Thank you guys for this very thoughtful discussion. It was actually very different than what I expected. I was kind of dreading signing on. So thank you guys. I am a wetland scientist. I just want to speak to, first of all, Sally, I agree, like whatever is implemented needs to be practical, implementable, and pragmatic. What I heard you said, I think they're very valid concerns, but I don't think any of those things or many of those things are insurmountable. For one, establishing what a qualified wetland scientist is. I think that the town can put together a roster of qualified individuals and have some minimum criteria, one of which might be a qualification, professional certification as a professional wetland scientist and or advanced degree in botany, hydrology, or soil science. I mean, I think those are pretty good minimum standards. Because I'm a geek and a wetland scientist, currently going after my professional certification, I do read the wetland delineations that come through town, and I can tell you that a lot of them are kind of poor quality. And so I personally would love to see that. The bar raised for the type of work. The other thing is, I don't think that the town of Silverton would ever be required to create tools for assessing the quality of wetlands from scratch. CDOT has a really nice rapid assessment. It takes less than from anywhere from a couple hours to half a day to complete. That provides a score for the quality of wetland based on the hydrology, soil quality, and emphasizing the botany, which is a really important part. So there are tools out there. The BLM also has a really great tool. So there's all these professional tools. I don't think that, and I actually would be terrified if this group of people were assigned the task of coming up with these tools to overcome some of these problems. Again, I just want to thank you guys for having this high quality discussion, and whatever outcome, I look forward to engaging. And I think that it's really great to see the town in general engaged in topics of conservation, restoration, and mitigation for environmental impacts. So thank you guys.
Thank you very much. That was thoughtful and insightful. Anybody else out there? I saw a couple hands raised before. Jesse and Zach, there they are. There we go.
Okay, you can unmute and then the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? This is just Jesse speaking.
We can
I
hear
didn't
you.
I didn't intend to say anything. So I think there was a point made earlier that I think is really relevant around this concept of like, what are we actually even talking about here? I mean, I heard someone in town tell me today that 100 years ago, all of Silverton's valley floor was a series of beaver ponds and wetlands. And any area of town that is an undeveloped lot is potentially subject to this ordinance and having to jump through these hoops and so forth in order to develop. And while I don't know that I believe that that's true, the reality is we don't 100% know the answer to that. I mean, we have some great experts in town who can tell us some things, but we're not all sitting around with a map that says, like Sally said, here's a 5-star wetland, here's a 1-star wetland, here are the wetlands that already have properties on them, here are the wetlands that don't. And I think this is a really hard discussion for you all to navigate without some sense of whether we're talking about 5% of the developable area outside of the avalanche zone in Shrine Hill, or we're talking about a lot over on Mineral Street, or we're talking about, you know, someone building a fence on, because that's a soil disturbance on any current lot in town. Like, it's really hard to tell from the way the language in the ordinance is written, you know, what the actual impacts of this are. And I guess what I would ask you to think about is, sure, it's an emergency from the sense that the public has a deep need to protect our natural resources. We're all in Silverton because it's a beautiful place to live with incredible natural resources around us, and we want to keep that. But the process of obtaining a building permit in town, especially new development, is a long process. If you don't have any applications now, how long is it going to be once someone starts that process before they actually bring this application before you and you find yourself in this so-called emergency situation? I mean, the building season, no one's going to be able to submit an application now that actually comes before you and break ground during this building season. Our building season is short. It's basically what, like April to October, best case scenario. And we do everything we can in basically 2 months up here to build. I guess I take issue still with this concept of an emergency, because if no one can truly like bring all their experts, and it's not like you can build a building without doing a soil survey anyway on an undeveloped land. You need that anyway for your foundation. So it's not like somebody is going to be able to come to you and say, hey, you know, I'd really like to break ground next week, and our processes are going to allow them to do that in a wetland area in the next couple of weeks. If you have some sort of survey conducted, or you do something that allows you to really assess this issue with more information, is that necessarily going to put you in a crummy situation. I guess that's what I wonder.
That's 3
Oh,
minutes.
I'm over.
So I just-
Sorry.
My timer was a little quiet.
But thank you.
But thanks
That's
for your
great.
input.
Yes.
And sorry to cut you off.
Anyone else?
Can we answer any of those questions?
I would like to respond to a
Yeah.
couple of, just over the
That's
past.
I want to just acknowledge we are like really going rogue here.
Yeah.
Heck, yeah.
So over the,
Feel it.
this goes back to some of even what Sally, you spoke about earlier, and Dana. What's been presented to us today, although imperfect, is sadly it reflects a lot of what other towns and counties have in place. I think because this is, a lot of people are struggling with this. I think a lot of towns and counties this is new for a lot of people, and they're trying to get this done. And I imagine, and TJ and Chris can correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine ours is very close to what other places look like. Then to talk about wetlands, again, just because they're not jurisdictional doesn't mean they're not wetlands. And according to the ordinance, identification of the wetlands is based on a 3-factor approach involving indicators of hydrophytics, vegetation, hydrosoil, and wetland hydrology. And then it goes into exactly what those things are. So you're not going to ever see a lot that's, in town and not be able to apply this matrix to it and not understand if it's going to be a wetlands or not. It's spelled out very clearly. So again, it's not going to be applied to every lot in town or every piece of open space in town. And then finally, the idea of an emergency or not an emergency. One of the reasons that I'm pretty gung-ho about getting some sort of ordinance in place temporarily even is because once an application is in the pipeline, we cannot put an ordinance that hasn't been passed. We cannot apply it to that. That's what we ran into this winter. So a lot of these folks, they had applications that had maybe gone through the planning commission and they were on their first passage through us. There was nothing we could do. Our hands were tied, and it wouldn't have mattered if it had been the nicest wetlands in the state. We would have had to allow building on it, and they hadn't broken ground yet. And they, hadn't done a lot of the, there's some of the other due diligence didn't need to be done, but the application was in process, meaning we could not then apply an ordinance that we hadn't passed to it. And so that is one of the reasons I still think that if not an emergency, moving this forward and doing it quickly, even temporarily until we do a rewrite. And as Shane said earlier, when they're doing the code rewrite, he's really looking for, we're going to try and get as much community engagement as possible. And so again, this, even though temporary, it could save us from doing some damage that we could not then fix later. And then we will get that community engagement for a code rewrite. But, I was thinking about it today as all these EPA trucks passed my house. We've got a history of mining in this county for over 125, 130, as long as we've been here, we've been mining here, and we're still paying the price. We haven't had an operating mine since 1990. So 30 years later, we're still paying the price for cleanup because nobody was thinking ahead. And what I really think is important is that we do try and think ahead, and hopefully we can save future generations some of the headache that we're going through now.
So I have a process question for staff. TJ, Chris, Gloria, Lucy. What I've heard a lot of both today and on feedback is, can we just be clear about scope and scale of what we're talking about? Can we have some real conversations at a board level or a work session level, or even at a town community level about what are we actually talking about when we're talking about non-jurisdictional wetlands in town limits that could be worth something, or at least having the conversation around what they're worth. And so one of the options on the table is a work session. I think it's something Sally and I have kind of been like asking for in different ways all along, and we just didn't quite have the framework to have it. I also want to be respectful to staff that, like, if we keep postponing a decision and respect for the community, I'm not sure that behooves us else also. But I just have heard over and over, like, how can we have this discussion if we don't actually know the land quantity, location, scale that we're actually talking about? That we're not necessarily talking about a willow in someone's yard. We're talking about X percentage of land. We've heard lots of people speak to it, but we've never had an official process through the board with our staff and with an expert to have that designation, like definition discussion and scope and scale discussion. And I know that we would probably like to get there with the code rewrite, but is that something that is possible in the meantime to help guide? I just see that as it's not just more information seeking. I know staff has really expressed like, just stop asking us for more information, but just as a way to get clarity on what specifically.
I want to jump in and piggyback off of what you've been saying, because I have a couple of thoughts here. One, it seems like we are talking about either getting community feedback down the line and coming up with the rules and ordinances around this later during the code rewrite, or we can do it now. And my question for Gloria regarding the options that we have here is it possible to do a combination of them? Because I'm hearing tonight that there are no protections for wetlands, and that's the issue right now, is that our hands are tied, we can't do anything. Option E gives us the option to put a pause on building for 6 months while we talk about a new ordinance. Option F gives us a ability to schedule a work session. And I'm wondering if in this 6 months, why don't we schedule a work session? Get the ordinance, not an emergency ordinance, just a ordinance for the definition of a wetland, do a work session and come up with a new ordinance around non-jurisdictional wetlands. Because I think that hits all the marks. We get community feedback. We have protections in place for 6 months while we figure things out and get our ducks in a row. And then we can address everything we went through during Sally's very detailed parsing of the current ordinance.
And it wouldn't stifle any future construction.
Because there's nothing in the pipeline right now. And as Jesse said,
any private property rights.
yeah, and as Jesse said, building season's almost over. 6 months puts us into December.
Does that kind of time frame get us to the outcome that we think is palatable?
So in order to do that, we would need to have a definition of a wetland adopted, so that if we did a pause, we would need to say that if it met this definition.
If instead of
there is like a little process there that we would need to follow in order to do that.
I'm wondering if instead of doing an emergency ordinance for the definition, we can just do an ordinance so we can get public feedback on that process as well.
Yeah, and so to get that ordinance in place, it would take, probably about, I think I wrote it on there, a time frame.
I know.
Yeah, the earliest it would be, if we got it done as soon as possible, would be September 21st.
Yep. And then at that point, you can discuss, a pause. If it's not an emergency, then a pause on those applications at that point, using that definition. Right now, the problem is we don't have a definition of a wetland that we could use to define what a pause would look like.
The previous proposal was use subject to review applications, but that still wouldn't have necessarily covered everything that we really want to cover, because some of these applications were not use subject to review.
So I'm open to an emergency ordinance or just an ordinance for the definition of a wetland, but I think this option that I just explained would address everything that has been talked about here tonight at this table and from the public.
And there is a proposed definition of a wetland in the draft ordinance.
Yeah, I'm just saying I personally could go either way on that, and I'm interested in what the rest of you think.
So are you asking for a work session to discuss the definition of the?
No, I was just.
Oh, no, yeah, I'm just
tossing it back to the board to say if anyone has a opinion on an emergency ordinance versus an ordinance using the current definition as it is in the emergency ordinance as is written. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, and I think it's important. Being a definition is, I think, incredibly important. And again, after having read that, the supplement, I think that, I mean, that covers a lot of like, and that's in what our definition would be, right? Is
Yeah, it's
referred to
embedded
the
in-
regional supplement, et cetera. So I think, so what you're saying is we get the definition through and then, which takes
Then-
several meetings for, even if it, so if it's not an emergency, it's first reading, second reading. And then after that, then we can use that definition for option E.
Yes, that's my proposition
And adding in a work session to option E as
Yeah,
well.
combining E.
To address the entirety of the ordinance.
Yes.
And can I ask the question to staff is like, is a work set, and this is probably a Clayton question too, because like if we're talking about actual property parcels, like, can we have a work session where we were actually talking about places on a map that we're scribbling up like we did with community builders that like could eventually have an effect? And can we have a work session? Could we pull that together with an expert that most people agree with? To kind of get us closer to this discussion of what are we actually talking about for land and scale that is through a process that is formal for the board? Because we have lots of stuff out there, but I think having something more formal, is that doable for staff and legally?
Gloria, do you want to answer for staff first?
Why don't you ask it? Why don't you answer legally and then I'll answer for staff?
So for a work session, the only real rule is that you're not making formal decisions. It's kind of like an executive session, right? However, in a work session, you can come up with options, put together maps, talk about what you like and get a consensus, I guess, as an example. Without getting into the details, you could, of course, maybe create a map, get consensus, knowing that might be something that's going to go into an ordinance for discussion. Does that answer your question, Trustee Cranker?
Yep, thank you. And staff has led us as best they can through this whole process of specific applications we were reviewing, where we're going from here. I just want to really call out CPS team and Lucy and Gloria for really doing their best within the framework we were working with. So staff perspective on a work session and what we could actually accomplish to move decision-making forward.
And I think relative to the timing of this, because we are coming into the code rewrite. And so like, does that get folded into the steering committee's work, or how can we, I'm just trying to think about like, what's the timeline? You know, how close is 6 months from now? I don't know, just to streamline that a little bit.
You know, I think I'm going to defer to TJ on this one as far as the work session capabilities.
Okay.
As you know, as soon as it becomes August, I will be buried with budget. So we will be pushing a lot of this onto our CPS and to our and to Lucy. So I'm going to let them answer for the staff capability there.
Yeah, thanks, Gloria. Applaud you all for a wonderful conversation. It's been quite interesting. I kind of struggle with this one, if you will, for all of the same reasons. But I guess the first question I have is one, I think we've already determined that what we're doing is looking at a Band-Aid. We're looking at something right now to get us between now and when the code is going to be fully updated.
Right.
If that's the case, then if I'm also understanding some of the conversation about this work session about drawing on a map and identifying wetland areas, I know it was brought up earlier that the ordinance right now puts the onus on the applicant property owners, but I think that that's the simplest, quickest way to something. I would also just caution, I think I've said this before, that any, it was definitely not our intention to put the onus on an applicant to do all of this. We can talk about that at the work session, why that was done, but also have to kind of realize that any information that the town is putting forward and applicants or property owners are relying on comes with it some risk and liability. And now I'm stepping out of my area, but I just want to be careful that the more detailed information you have, the more you open yourself up for liability, if you will. So there's a balancing act there. And so bringing it back to kind of the work session, I think what we can talk about, and Gloria and I tried to formulate that in some of the conversation, some of the ideas. And if you look at number F or letter F, I think those are the things that we can very easily work through in a deliberate dialogue in a work session.
Yeah.
That is, are we talking about protection or mitigation? The difference between, okay, here's where the wetland is. Either we're protecting it, that delineated line, or we're coming up with some type of a mitigation strategy for disturbing it. The second one is scalability and equity. This is, no matter how we look at this, it's going to have a disproportionate impact on various property owners. And so it's just kind of talking through that. What are the strategies? How can we do that? How do we do this in an equitable way? And then the last is an impact analysis. There's one that we struggle with as staff. I think this is where I was just saying that if we wanted to try to, this would be very difficult to do in a work session because we could do some hypotheticals. But again, what we're not going to be able to do in a work session between now and then, or before, frankly, a code update where it should happen, is identify all the properties and how it's going to impact specific properties. We can do some modeling, some scenarios, different lot sizes. Hey, if it's sitting over here, how does that do that? What does that look like? We were contemplating whether or not to have some of that prepared for tonight. So there's a lot that we can do. And then what we can also do is talk through, in general, the development process, not just on the town side, but on the developer side, and how this may or may not impact different types of applications. You know, we brought up building permits, new homes, new construction. That's one kind of bucket that we can talk through. Another was brought up earlier by a member of the public is fences. Yeah, how are these? So we can kind of talk through some of those different scenarios to see how these regulations may or may not apply based on what an applicant or property owner has to do today. Forget wetlands, right? Wetlands aside, what they have to do today to get a permit to do any type of construction or improvement in town. So I think that that's what we can help with. I do believe that that would be a valuable conversation to move the needle. And then we can at least get the regulations in order. And then we kind of talk through the interim. And then what we do through the public process is identify the locations and other elements. So at least we can get some of the process components in place. I think relatively easily, I guess. I don't want to say anything with this conversation is easy, but you know, I think that's what we can bring, and I think we could do that in a work session, kind of as outlined in option F there. So hopefully that helps clarify a little bit, and I'd be happy to answer your questions if you have any.
So what you're saying, TJ, is that like we could do some of the steps of what would ultimately be happening in the code rewrite. We could tackle, if the board wanted it as a priority, we could tackle some of those process pieces sooner rather than later. Is that correct of what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, I mean, yes. And essentially what it is pushing and pulling on the current ordinance.
Yeah. Jesse.
I just have one thing to say. We can go all the way back to the beginning of the meeting to what came out in the packet. The fact that this was going to be an emergency, whatever. So we have a landowner who came from Kansas City to come to this meeting. Now, I don't know when it was decided. Was it 5 minutes before the meeting that, oh, Mayor Furman is going to recuse. And we are going to, and we did, I don't know if Jordan has been here or if we knew he was not going to be here. To me, what I'm seeing is we have gone through this whole time with everything happening when there's one thing. Were we going to have this an election? Were we going to vote on this before, 2 minutes before the meeting? Or, I mean, we're talking about all the other people that are involved in their homes and their developments. And we have somebody here who has come to Silverton from Kansas City, who is a homeowner and has been for years. And everything just gets blown up with everything else. I would just like to know one thing with recusing. I just be not wanting to and gonna try not to again, but trying, just kind of paying attention to things. It seems to me like you need to get a tighter grip on who recuses and who doesn't. What is the reason why you are not voting? Because it's not just one person, it's several people. And it's just here and there and everywhere. You need to lock that down. And you need to get that to grips on things. But I just want to know, when was this decided that there wasn't going to be an emergency vote tonight? 2 minutes before the meeting? I just curious, just thinking about other people.
I'll answer it. During the meeting. When Clayton explained, when Mayor Furman explained, thank you.
But
and I appreciate your comment. I think all of us do.
Yeah.
And I appreciate all your time and the folks online and at home.
But who decided that it wasn't an emergency meeting then and said, okay, well, we can vote? I mean, it was somebody else that said, oh, okay, so now we don't need the 3/4. We can take the 5 and do a vote then. That was talked about.
I have a question. I'm confused. If it sounds like we don't like the ordinance as it currently is. And I know that Clayton had said we don't have enough people to approve it.
Correct.
My question is, do we have enough people to deny it?
Yeah, all the other options were options.
Okay, so the option I was talking about, we could potentially vote on if someone were to make a motion on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or that's not Clayton, that was for you. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have answered that.
Clayton, is that correct?
Yes, you have to have the law states, it's CRS 3111-1051 for all those fact checkers out there, that you have to have a 3/4 vote to pass an emergency ordinance. It doesn't say you have to have any. And so by default, if you don't have a 3/4 vote, meaning in your case, 6 of 7 trustees, then the ordinance would fail.
But we could make a motion to vote on option E.
E and F.
Yeah.
And F.
So a hybrid.
Yes, that's what earlier I'd asked Gloria. Can I?
But I would say you can't vote on F until we adopt E.
Okay.
Like, until we adopt an actual.
So then I think the question here is, do we want to adopt the definition as a normal ordinance or an emergency ordinance before we make any motions? I think we should just get that done and then we can move on.
And that would be giving staff direction.
Yeah.
To adopt a definition of a wetland.
Yeah.
So
then we would present that to you all either as an ordinance, or I don't know if we can do it as an emergency ordinance at this point, Clayton, can we?
That's not a staff decision. That's a board decision if they believe that public health, safety, and welfare is eminently endangered.
Yeah, I believe this is the third bullet point of E for the rest of the board and for anyone watching. I've said enough.
Are you guys?
I'm just waiting for, do we want to do an emergency definition or a normal ordinance definition? That's the only question I'm asking.
Due to the lack of trustees and mayor, we cannot pass emergency anything.
Okay, so
Am I correct?
Right, so we would represent it to
Exactly.
you as just the definition of a wetland.
this is about a direction to town staff, not a vote.
The reason to call it an emergency ordinance to define wetland would be to expedite the definition being in place.
Hey, that's my understanding.
And
Yes.
Can we use the word expediting instead of emergency?
Yeah, expedited.
Expedition.
But doesn't it change, it being emergency ordinance versus a regular ordinance, it changes the kind of level of public.
Well, and so it does. So technically, if it is a regular ordinance, we have a hearing where we have public comment and open that public comment. Also, because it's in chapter 16, right, Lucy? We have a 20-day notice period prior, if we did a regular ordinance. So that would be noticed in the paper 20 days prior to that ordinance going in front of the board. And I think the timelines are laid out in your.
We feel a sense of urgency because it's been a long time coming and getting to place. And I think the experience that I am having as a trustee is just seeking, we've struggled all along with this because initially it was a specific agenda item to a particular application. Public input was really, had to be limited to those applications. So the public input for that was limited. Then we have this wetlands ordinance as an emergency ordinance, and so it's being expedited and it's had reduced public input because of that label that it has on it. I know this is going to sound like I'm kicking the can, but I actually just want to have a ordinance come before the board because it promotes an improved, healthier input process for the community. This is a really divisive, really emotional, really contentious issue for people. I just think my preference would be to have it come along as a regular ordinance, the definition of wetland. I think the definition of a wetland is also very significant.
I agree. I think I like the tone of it for our community as being a regular ordinance that people can have input in on multiple times. And I think we've heard from staff several times, both today and other days, that we don't, not that the crisis has passed, because there's still a crisis that we need to make a decision and kind of move forward as a community and where we're going on this. And we currently don't have anything in our code, but the crisis of applications in front of us, the building timeframe, like I think that we can still do this well if we do this through a process that has public engagement. And I think there's a lot of agreement here on adopting a definition of a wetland. So.
Oh yeah, let's check.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's imperative that we adopt a definition, but yeah, I would like to do it sooner rather than later. I think that the definition that they put forward in the emergency ordinance, although we're not going to vote on that, I think that that definition and a lot of the other, as I said, I read a lot of the other ordinances for other counties, et cetera, and that's the definition that is widely accepted and used. And so I'm not sure that the definition of wetlands is as contentious maybe as we think it is, but I guess I could be wrong.
Yes, that is what this would be, is just adopting the definition. I think I agree with Tyler in terms of probably have a slight preference for an emergency ordinance for adopting the definition. But I also hear you both on wanting public feedback, and part of why I was like, we should do the combination in the first place was that I think we can satisfy like most people who have spoke up tonight and everyone here with a combined kind of compromise solution.
Okay, so potentially what we could explore tonight and come to some agreement on would be to pursue, my preference is for a regular ordinance, but I'm not gonna fall on the sword one way or the other. To define wetland in the next, in its natural process, according to that timeline that's legally defined. And then we could, once we have that process underway, we would deny the emergency ordinance that we reviewed tonight, give staff direction to draft the definition, put it to an ordinance, and then pause all building applications once we have wetlands defined on those properties for 6 months. Yeah.
And the goal and outcome of those 6 months.
And during those 6 months, hold a work session.
Could maybe even do working groups if we want more community feedback? I don't know if that's an option. I should probably ask.
I think we want to make this, we want to create a high quality product. And we also want to not lose complete functioning of all other government priorities like budgeting and finance committee work. And so I would prefer that not go beyond a work session. And then I think the steering committee will eventually take that. I would foresee the steering committee and the code rewrite process folding in the wetland work into the code rewrite.
So then there'd be a second opportunity for public feedback.
At least, whatever the steering committee would. Direct. Correct me if I'm wrong. That works.
As far as the steering committee goes, yeah.
And
that was their goal, is to take every kind of policy issue out of that development readiness assessment and be able to define scope and scale, and then how to present to the community and what feedback would be needed.
And facilitate the process for.
Right. Yeah. And work with the facilitator if that is our consultant that we get for the code. Right?
Is as far as the work session goes and setting goals for the outcome of that, is that something we would or should discuss at our retreat, or we would discuss it as an agenda item on the next board meeting? Like, what's the most effective way to kind of, I feel like we've had tons of discussion, but as a board focusing specifically on a work session of what questions are we trying to answer and what's possible to answer in that work session, how can we decide that?
And I think that's one area where, unless we're way off base, I think staff can kind of direct that as far as what we present. Yes, exactly. Like TJ has a lot of ideas on how to get more information from you all on how what we want to do to move forward, basically.
Perfect.
And that was TJ's actually note in there was a work session. So that's why I keep referring back to him.
All right. TJ, that works for you? Just to be sure that we're all kind of on the same track here.
Yes, I'll go a little bit further. That I think my takeaway from a work session would be us asking some pointed questions, getting some better clarity, and then our role is to write the policies that fit that clarity. So it's more of a dialogue and what ifs, and we can be prepared at that work session to go down a couple what ifs. So I think that would be, to what Gloria mentioned. I think it's more of a, if you will, a staff directed dialogue to try to find some clarity in some of these components, short-term, mid-term, long-term.
Do we have an option for that work session to include an wetlands expert, as we would like to define, to weigh in on the
qualified?
Is that an option or relevant for that scope of that work session? I think it's something that's come up a lot, but is that what we're talking about?
No.
Was that to me?
Sure.
I guess I would lean towards not necessarily.
Okay.
And I think the reason I say that is that I'd like to go through that process of who does what and what the role of the government is versus what the role of the property owner and applicant is, so that we can understand a little bit more about what that is. And understand, I mean, then after that, an outcome could be, we better clarify that. So that's where I think that would be an outcome of the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Do we have to make a motion to go past 10 o'clock?
11.
11. Oh,
Well,
sweet. Perhaps.
let's keep cruising, huh?
Yeah.
I think we're really close.
The only area where I'm a little confused is I don't know if we can do the pause on applications tonight without the wetland.
Right.
So that would have to come before you with the definition of the wetland, and if that is, and I'm not sure, are we on the emergency or not emergency route for that definition? But either way, it would come up during that.
I mean, I would like to see an emergency ordinance.
I think though that if
For the
we call it emergency
For the definition.
to just expedite something, I don't know if that's best practice. Like every time we want something to go a little quicker, we say, let's put emergency on this and skip the public input process.
Well,
keep things rolling.
but emergency ordinance is for the health, safety, and welfare of the public, and I believe that defining wetlands gets us to start saving wetlands, which is in the best interest of the public and its health, safety, and
Okay.
welfare.
No, like I said, I'm not gonna fall on the sword. I
That's just sort of
Oh,
how I get there.
And this allows us to keep the car moving forward, not
Okay.
putting it in park. I've used that before. And we can keep it moving forward. Yes?
I do feel similar to Sally. I agree that using the term emergency feels a little bit forced, because I think we can still get the same outcome without doing it, but I also have a value of kind of cohesion and respectfulness on board, and so I'm not gonna fall on my sword either. But let it be stated for the record, I would prefer it not to be an emergency.
You have a thesaurus?
I should for these meetings.
It's a synonym for emergency.
I don't think we're legally allowed to change.
I mean, come on. We're almost there, guys.
Okay, so Jim, your emergency.
Mhm.
Okay,
I would like to
Emergency.
expedite
the definition.
the definition of a wetland so that we can keep the process moving forward. We're meeting our goals as trustees, as a local government. We are also meeting and exceeding all the expectations of everyone here this evening and online. By doing this Q&A, but keeping it going forward in a positive fashion. And I think that this does it, this allowing us to do it is.
Okay,
Olivia said.
I would prefer that it was a regular ordinance process, but we can, for the purpose of moving forward, call it an emergency ordinance for the purpose of defining wetlands. And then we don't know, how do we find out if we can pause tonight versus wait for the definition?
Well, it would,
We have to wait.
definition has to.
I mean, sorry, what did we have to figure out?
So that would be it. So if it's emergency or not, so we would present to you all a emergency ordinance next meeting that includes this definition that you see right here of a wetland. And that would be added to chapter 16. And then we would be able to, if you wanted at that time, you could do it in the meeting, is to pause the applications that met that definition. Is that correct, Clayton? I just want to double check myself.
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
Can you rephrase the question?
For 400.
Sure, so it's more of a process, it's a process check. So tonight we could I could get direction from the board to present an emergency ordinance for the definition of a wetland as it's presented in this current ordinance, but taking that out and just separating it out. And then it would be a definition in chapter 16 of what a wetland is. And then at that meeting that we present the emergency ordinance, which would be the next meeting, the 24th, the board could then pause applications that met that definition.
You mean by some sort of moratorium resolution? Is that what we're
Correct.
talking about?
Correct.
I mean, that yes, that's all. You could do that. Keeping in mind that, you know, I'm not trying to split hairs with the trustees. I do think there is a way to, you know, if something is an emergency, you know, there has to be some immediate impact to, you know, public health, safety, and wellness. That doesn't mean there has to be an actual emergency situation, but you just want to be able to couch the reason for any emergency ordinance in those terms. I think that you guys have talked about it, but you're going to want to be able to, and I can help with the language in that. I do think there are some things that implicate the necessity to pass this immediately in order to preserve wetlands, but there has to be a separate clause in the emergency ordinance, and then of course you have to have 3/4 vote. So just make sure any emergency ordinance we prepare, you have, you know, we have the correct reasoning behind it, and we have the ability to pass it. And I apologize to the board as well, because I was unaware that we were going to be missing a board member, and I would have that probably would have put up a red flag for me. But I was also unaware until the moment that it happened that anybody was going to be recusing. The recusal is always an option for a trustee. In the case of Mayor Furman, it was not recommended per se by me or any members of staff, and it was his prerogative, and we will never know until that moment happens whether or not a trustee or the mayor is going to exercise that prerogative. I answered more than your question, but I wanted to clarify that point since I was on it.
Thank you, Clayton.
Okay, I stepped out. Are we clear on the direction from here?
Would you
Is it time
mind
to, like, change
restating it? Would you just restate it real quick for my records? I just want to make sure I'm clear, crystal clear.
So
You want to restate?
yeah, I guess I'll do it. Okay, motion to deny emergency ordinance 2023-09 and to give staff direction to adopt the definition of a wetland as an emergency ordinance and put a pause on all building applications that had the defined wetland.
We can't do that portion.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's only.
Sorry, I'm just reading it off the.
No, here, what we can do is maybe just say it like,
Deny emergency
we're
ordinance.
not making any motion.
Okay, great. To deny emergency ordinance 2023-09 and to give staff direction to work on adopting the definition of wetland as an emergency ordinance.
Okay,
That's what we're talking about.
Mhm.
Is that correct?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And that would mean that in the next meeting, we would have also on the agenda the option of the pause.
A resolution for a pause on applications as it relates to the definition of the wetland.
Wetland.
Okay.
And then we would also give direction to schedule the work session between that pause being adopted and the 6 months from then.
Great. That is clear direction. Thank you. Okay, getting late. I just want to make sure I have all my notes.
Is there a motion that needs to be made? Because now I'm confused.
No, there's not.
Okay,
Just that.
okay.
So we don't have to
Probably.
make them, we just deny the ordinance.
Well, it failed, but because there's not a.
Right. We couldn't have voted on it anyways. 2 questions. One, in the language about the pause, are we allowed legally to use the word pause instead of the M word?
That would be a Clayton question.
So just, you don't have to answer it now, But, and then secondly, as we're thinking about the pause, is the 6-month timeframe, that'll sound right, timeframe from staff, from board. Does it make sense to have something before us? Then we're gonna say, is this the right timeframe?
Yeah, and then I think we need to name that date. Like, what is the 6-month date?
Yeah.
Good follow-up.
Clayton, do you want to take the pause question?
Yes, sorry, I'm dealing with a gnat infestation here. It's just as warm. Well, I mean, it doesn't really matter what you call it. It's going to be what the terms of it are. So,
Yes, but words,
obviously,
sometimes words scare people.
Yeah, so then let's
I
call it.
understand that. I think that cat's out of the bag personally, but if you want to call it something else, then of course you could, as long as it's well defined and you know what you're all deciding, I think you can call it whatever you want.
From the time of the meeting, we can say from now till this date.
Right. We define the terms and we call it what we want.
Great.
And then your second
Is what I heard.
question was to staff.
The second question to staff is, so we don't waste time on drafting something that we're gonna talk about is 6 months, the actual right amount of time. The board think that's the amount of.
Like, is it 7? Is it 5? Is it?
It's really up to you if we can come to a conclusion within that time, which hopefully we
might have
can.
some
TJ, go right ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just because it's getting late or not. I apologize for if this, might be, it depends on, if we are coming up with a Band-Aid, then most certainly. If we want to stay within the confines that I was just explaining, that wouldn't be a problem at all within that time frame. It's as we start kind of fluttering out and scope creep on it that it becomes a lot more complex, because we get into that subjectivity and the community dialogue. So I think that's going to be the big one.
Thank you.
So is it possible in the meantime for us as trustees, because it's so late and we have a lot to think about, to consider again, the ideal outcome? I've been opposed to blanket moratoriums, long-term moratoriums forever publicly. I'm not in favor of this, but I also do want an outcome that's useful.
Right.
And so are we able to reflect over the next week before this comes before us, if what we think based on what TJ said, we can get the outcome that is good enough or most effective, or if we want to think about something longer and provide you that feedback by email, Gloria? Or like, I guess that's the question. Can we?
I mean, yes, you can provide that feedback, but what I'll be presenting to the board is what we decide on tonight as a full board. But knowing individual feedback is helpful in answering questions regarding that, whatever we present to you all.
I think if I may, that feedback would be very helpful in preparing for the work session.
Mm-hmm.
I guess like my secret goal of that work session in this process is that perhaps it's a Band-Aid, but it's like a super good one. It's like an ace that can ultimately tee us up for a really high quality contribution to the code rewrite, because I think the code rewrite, we did the development readiness assessment, and that is such a helpful tool and document for us to look at what the code rewrite is going to entail. And I would say, I was saying this earlier to someone, I can't exactly remember off the top of my head how many things on that right-hand category were in sort of the this is way beyond just reorganizing the code. This is like the public input process. I think there are 10 to 15 things in that row. And so, if we can somehow do a little heavy lifting ahead of that, potentially that's facilitating a more efficient code rewrite process, because we're going to get to that and suddenly wetlands are going to be in
one of many. Yeah. So what we're looking for, TJ, is a super athletic strip Band-Aid, not the Band-Aid that falls off in an hour. No, we use a lot of Band-Aids in my house.
No, laughing.
Yes.
Yeah, you know exactly what Band-Aid we're talking about. Perfect. Okay. I think it's time that we wrap this up. So if we have clear direction for you, Gloria, and no more discussion on the work session or any follow-up items that can't be covered in an email, I think we invite Shane back in and close public comment and reopen public comment before we should close the meeting. To conclude. Okay.
Thanks, Ellie. Thank you, board.
Okay, so we will open up public comment now. I see Cole has his hand raised, but if there's any in-person closing public comment, yeah, great.
To clarify on that vote, emergency, there had to be a 6 unanimous vote, right? It had to be 6-4, right? So because 5 affirmatives would have been 0.714, so it wouldn't have been 3/4. So I think no matter if there wasn't a recusal or anything, if somebody would have voted against, it wouldn't have mattered. So before the rumor mill goes crazy about Shane, that's not what the point was of the recusal.
Yeah.
So it had to be 6 unanimous votes, and Jordan's not here, and
Correct.
that was
Thank you.
so just before Silverton blows up about that, slow down.
Thank you. And if I may, I was under the impression that it took 5 votes when I chose to recuse. It was news to me when Clayton told me it took 6. That was
I just want to call out that we are trying to raise the level of transparency, honesty, integrity. And so I just appreciate your approach and appreciate your leadership in this, and just want to call that out for the board culture that we have. I know it wasn't required, and I just think it's important for the community. And as Ian said, not important to spread around that it was done for some other intent. Like, that is just like, the guy can't catch a break. So I think just let's be all really clear and know that we're doing our best to be honest and transparent up here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other in-person comment? Nate, thanks.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for this tremendous amount of work. Thank you for waiting in the hallway. Welcome back. Sorry to the person traveling. Yeah, I know that there's a lot vested in this from a lot of different angles, and thank you for all the work. I wanted to back up what Tyler pointed out in the ordinance. The section on mitigation is a fantasy. There's no such thing as building something that it took nature thousands of years to create. You can't offset. But I know this will continue to be a very, very long process for all of you. So thank you for everything.
Thank you. Do we have other in-person comment? Sandy.
Can get up.
Now after 10, so.
Well, it's been 11 months since this started for me, and 7 trips on an airplane. And I can say that I think this is probably one of the most interesting and instructive meetings I've ever been to. I do feel that all of you have been superb in trying to understand the importance of the wetlands and also to protect the homeowners. I believe in private rights just as much as you do. I also think that the public, I think that there's some underestimation of the knowledge of the public in Silverton. We've had a website up for almost 7 months and it explains everything about the wetlands, about why they're important, how long, what to do, what the situation is now. And we've had several hundred hits on that. Most of the people that I talk to in town have a very clear understanding of the importance of the wetlands, but not all, because we have many new people who have moved here and do not understand that. But I guess the final thing I would like to say is a thank you for your diligence and your intelligence in attacking a very, very serious problem here. The growth of this town is so important. And the protection of the environment, you have already said, is extremely important in the master plan. So all I can really say is thank you so much.
Thank you.
Being here.
Doc had his hand up for a while.
But apparently I'm the 90% trusted scientist. I'll take that. Although we do shoot for 95% to be statistically significant. So I need to boost that up a little bit. I really appreciate all of your time. This is awesome. You're working really hard. I can tell all of you care. That's great. I encourage you to not rewrite the wheel. There are plenty of ordinances to go off of. I encourage you to follow the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers outlines. It's very simple. If you're going to go into a work session about this, do not rewrite the wheel. It is already there. It's there for you to follow. Sally, I just want to address some of your questions. I thought they were great. What about buffers, 25 feet? What do we do about that? I just want to explain that most of our wetlands are groundwater fed. If you put a building up against a wetland and you don't give it that buffer, you will drain it. That's how that works. So the buffers are in place to protect the wetlands. Mitigation, if you mitigate outside of our county, we lose that benefit. So if you say we need to look elsewhere outside of the county, although it is difficult to find restoration projects, our community lose that benefit. So that's the problem there. Dana, you had a great point about order of operations. How do we prioritize? What are we losing? If we don't protect wetlands, I would say you've kind of got a one chance at that, right? If we let it go through, they're developed. We can always apply for more grants for houses. You can't rebuild a wetland if there's a house on top of it. For those that are concerned that these wetlands have not been delineated, please see the Freedom of Information Act provided to town by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you. Anyone else in person? I'm sorry, you can take this over. I mean, you filled in the hall on it. Now you're just like letting me do this. But seriously. Okay, all right, we'll take Cole. You can unmute yourself and the floor is yours.
Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Well, thank you very much. I respect you guys. I've grown to learn you guys throughout the times. I've been happy with you guys' progress on a lot of things. You guys have taken a lot of considerations with, like, let's say what I've done with the lighting ordinance. There's a lot of things that has to be done with that. But taking consideration of the people's things. I mean, there is power lines that go right through those lands too, as well. I mean, I've looked back through those properties. I mean, yes, I just recently bought 3 lots up there and hopes to hopefully expand some of my experiments with astrophotography. Yeah, I would like to develop some things like that for the community. It's kind of like, I don't know, maybe I should be more involved with you guys as I'm more shut up in my own self in my own business. But I would like to reach out more to you guys as individuals as well as neighbors. I don't necessarily agree. No one's ever going to agree on each other at all aspects. But I really appreciate everybody who is trying to do something for this community. Their dreams is as much as my dreams. I should say that very, very sincerely. So I appreciate all you guys and have good night.
Thank you, Cole.
Thank you guys and ladies and gentlemen.
Melody.
Okay, I think I'm back.
We hear you.
I
have to tell you, this has probably been the most amazing conversation I've ever heard, in that it was so thorough and so thoughtful. And I appreciate all the efforts everyone put into this. I do want to tell you something that's been worrying me, because our house just had our 40th birthday. It's that we came to town, bought a couple of lots, and started building. We didn't have to pay all the fees and all the tests and everything else to just start the house. And so the problem to me is we talk about affordable housing, but we're making building housing more expensive for very many reasons. And I don't mean this one alone, but I think you need to keep in mind that the more it costs up front to build a house means it's going to be wealthier house owners and not the people that are just going to be cooks or chefs or teachers or whatever. That's kind of the problem. We're splitting the community into wealthier homes and places where the regular workers can't build their own house. And I just hope that you'll keep that in mind in the future and move forward as you always do. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other attendees, Zoom attendees? Okay. You want to close her down?
Sure. Seeing no further public comment, we'll close the public comment period. The time's 10:22 p.m. Thank you all for a productive and really positive evening. This meeting's adjourned. Have a great night.
Okay.
Thanks for being.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Henry, all the way from Lake